The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. I had one job: don't open the door. Roger was a no-frills type of guy. He was of good posture, stern, and his clothes were crisp down to the French cuffs on his sleeves. His tone was soft and his words direct but polite. I'd known him all but a few seconds before I decided that I could trust this man with my life, which was why I took everything he said quite seriously. I had found the gig online. It was a posting for someone to house sit. I surmised that Roger was likely some kind of property manager and was short-staffed, which was why he had to use a third-party app to fulfill his needs, even if he weren't used to seeking help. Because although he seemed relaxed, a part of me felt as if he was reluctant to let go of the reins easily, which made me think that he was either incredibly passionate about his job or really responsible, both of which I found to be extremely positive qualities. That concludes the house tour. Now, he clapped his hands together. The fridge, the kitchen, the pantry, the living room, bathrooms, even any of the bedrooms is yours to use. Consume, sleep, relax. It's up to you. But there's one rule that I insist be followed. Yeah, sure, I nodded. Until I get back, do not open the door. What? I regretted the words the instant they left my lips. No, yeah, okay, yeah. He didn't say another word, only stared at me. No, I get it. I promise I won't open the door until you get back. I like you, kid, and the algorithm thinks you're fit for the job, which I tend to trust these things. So let's be clear here. Do not open the door. It doesn't matter what happens. Don't let anyone inside. Yeah, of course. No, I get it. Some people like to limit their personal spaces. I once went to a friend's house. It was a model home at first, the kind that all the prospective buyers tour right. And my friend's parents never got over the walls. They always complained that all the people that walked in and out of them, touched them, seeped their dead skin cells into the walls or something. They even painted over it quite a few times, if I remember correctly. But still, they said it wasn't the same, that it wasn't right. So yeah, I completely understand. Personal space and everything. I respect that. Roger let out a content-filled sigh and then smiled easily. You're going to do great. He looked at his watch. I had never seen a nicer one, to be honest. Okay, I've got another engagement, so lock the door behind me, and I'll be back. Then, without another word, he left. Don't open the doors, I repeated after him. Got it. The house was a good size. I've house sat at others before, mainly to feed their dog or some exotic fish. And although there wasn't much furniture in this one, it felt classy, timeless almost. I walked around to check that all the windows were secured. The sliding door leading to the backyard was closed. The door from the kitchen, which led into the garage, was locked. Before I sat down in the front room and turned on the TV, I was in the middle of watching a rerun of Campfire Tales when I heard my first knock. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping whoever it was would go away. Hello? They knocked again. Do you have a moment for Jesus Christ? Shit, I muttered. Getting off the couch, I walked over to the door and leaned in. Yes? I cleared my throat. Hello? Hi, we're with the local church, and we were wondering if you have accepted Jesus into your life. No, I'm sorry, I'm not religious, I lied. If you'd like, we can give you some pamphlets for some light reading. He pulled on the handle. They helped me a lot some time back. and maybe you'd find use for them too. A second voice came next. A lot of people have told us that they have been useful for them, not knowing when they needed it the most. If you could. Sorry, I'm not interested, but thank you. There was a pause. Sure, we get it. But do you mind if we leave you these pamphlets on the door for another member of the household, perhaps? You can grab them whenever you'd like. Yeah, that's fine, thanks. I could hear the paper scraping against the door and saw the handle jiggle slightly before the first voice spoke again. Thanks for your time today. I waited for the sound of their footsteps to disappear before I decided to breathe. I then looked through the peephole to make sure they were gone. My hand instinctively reached for the handle to grab the pamphlets, as I didn't want the house to look untidy from the outside. I had no sooner touched the knob before I remembered what Roger said. But no one's here, I said aloud. Still, I'd technically be breaking the rule. I couldn't help but smile. When did you get to be such a stickler for rules? I said to myself, feeling rather proud as I returned to the couch and clicked through a few movie titles on stream before settling on an old classic. I don't know how far I got into the movie before I heard another knock on the door. What are the chances, I thought. What a busy house. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping they would go away. Hello? A voice came from outside. Pizza delivery. My stomach growled. I looked up at the clock. It was past noon. The only problem was I didn't order any pizza. Hello? Pizza delivery? They knocked again. I've got a double pepperoni and a pineapple pizza. For Roger? I got up from the couch again. Roger didn't tell me that this gig included lunch. Hold on just a minute, I shouted. I'm coming. I looked through the peephole as I reached for the door handle, but something wasn't right. I could feel it. Was this a test? Had Roger called the local pizzeria to make sure that I wasn't breaking his one simple rule? If I did, would that mean I wouldn't get paid? I looked through the peephole again. It was a young guy, younger than me, but looked old enough to drive. He wore a dark blue polo that had curled collars at the edge and was holding up a red insulated bag. I didn't order any pizza. I could see the kid sigh before looking at the receipt. Is this $2.26? Yeah. Well, I've got a pizza here for you. For Roger? Yeah, for Roger. Well, I'm not Roger. But this is $2.26? It is. Look, the pizza's already been paid for. If you don't want to tip me, that's fine. I just have to get to my next delivery. He waited. I didn't budge. I'm going to leave it here, he directed toward a half pillar on the porch, shaking his head as he grabbed 2 boxes and set them down before zipping up his delivery pouch. Cheap ass, he muttered. I felt my stomach growl again as I watched him walk away. And walk away. Now, I failed to mention this earlier, but the peephole oversaw the entire driveway and most of the sidewalk. So when the guy walked out of sight, he was a good house down before I could no longer see him. The thing was, I never saw his delivery vehicle either. I looked at the pizza sitting on the half pillar. A few cheap paper plates were stacked on top, and I could see the packets of Parmesan being warmed up. I took a deep breath in hopes to stave off my urges, but that only made it worse as the smell permeated through the door. It was pizza, all right. I would bet my life on that one. But still, I didn't open the door. Instead, I got back on the couch and turned down the volume on the TV. In fact, I got to about 3 volume before I decided to mute the thing outright and began to watch my movie in complete silence. Some time passes, and I ate some burritos I found in the freezer. I was mid-bite into this double-stuffed cheese burrito when the sound of 2 kids outside the door could be heard. No, you knock. No, come on, you do it. Hey, it's your ball. Fine. This kid knocked on the door. Hello, he shouted loudly. I'm sorry for disturbing you, but our ball went over your fence. Do you think you could get it for us? I didn't move a muscle. Another knock came. Hello? Maybe they would go away. Hello? He knocked again. We can hear you, you know. We can hear you chewing. I swallowed my last bite roughly and wiped my hands on my jeans. I leaned into the peephole to see two kids about 7 or 8 standing outside. They had on shorts and t-shirts and looked a little muddy. The other kid's voice rang through as I approached. Come on, please. We just want our ball back. I'm sorry, but I can't help you right now. I'm busy. Could you come back later? Please, the first kid begged. Could you help us? My dad's about to come home soon and he's going to be so mad if I told him I lost another ball. I looked into the peephole again and saw that the kid looked nervous, scared even. He was wringing his hands. Fuck, I muttered under my breath. Okay, hold on, let me go take a look, I hollered. Then I walked toward the back and glanced around the yard. Sure enough, a bright red ball with a yellow star on it sat in the grass near the fence. I grabbed the handle before debating with myself. It's technically a door, right? Sliding door, sliding door. I played with the words in my mouth. It's right in the name. It's a sliding door, I chuckled. That's like asking if water's wet. But still, the sound of the kid worrying rang in my ear, and I didn't want him to get into trouble. And I had my hand on the door when I also noticed a football laying on its side nearby. I walked halfway between the sliding door and the front door and shouted, "Which ball is yours?" "What?" I shouted through the door. "What kind of ball do you have?" There was a pause. "A basketball," the second kid said. I went back to the sliding door and scanned the grass before going back. "Sorry, kids. I can't help you out. There's no basketball back there." "No doofus," the first kid whispered. "It's a soccer ball," he yelled. I shook my head. "No soccer balls either." "Please, could you open the door and let us take a look? Maybe you missed it." I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. "No, I'm sorry. I can't help you right now. Maybe if you come back later." It was so soft I almost mistook it for something from the TV. I stood up and backed away. "You said you'd feed me if I was hungry." I pushed the couch away and found a trap door where I'd been sitting this entire time. There was a hole in one of the planks. I looked into it and saw an eyeball staring back at me. The figure backed up and revealed the outlines of a kid. They were pale as a ghost, with long black hair that was unkempt and unruly. "You're not him." "Who?" I asked quickly. "Is it Roger?" "I don't know their name." "Who are you?" I asked. "Christian." "Christian, are you okay?" "No, I told you. I'm hungry." "Fuck," I whispered. "It's the house. It's just the house again." I shook my head. "No way. I'm not going to listen to you. Can you feed me?" Christian reached a tiny finger through the hole. And for the first time since I started house-sitting here, I had been touched. This was real. It felt real. I scrambled to the floor and fiddled with the lock. "Christian, I'm going to get you out of here. I promise." "No, don't." "What?" "If he finds out, we'll get in trouble," he jumbled. I looked around, half expecting Roger to appear out of nowhere, half wondering if there was a murdering, deranged homeowner that was going to sever my head from my beating heart. "Don't open any of the doors," Christian warned. "What happens if I open a door?" "You'll never leave." Christian disappeared from view. I hit the lock. Fuck this shit. I'm sick and tired of always being afraid. I ran to the kitchen and rummaged through the drawers. This house had enough of me. I found a hammer and clutched it in one hand, calling the police with the other as I went back to the living, determined to bust this lock. "Hello? 911. What is your emergency?" "I'm a house sitter, and I found a kid trapped inside. I think the guy I've been working for, or the people he's working for." "Fuck, I don't know. I don't know anything." I realized. All I know is that there's a boy here. A kid. His name's Christian. and they've been keeping him under the fucking couch. Please, you've got to help us. I don't know when someone's coming back. I've tracked your location through the GPS signal. 2 units will be arriving there shortly. Please stand by. I didn't have time to wait, afraid that I would be caught in the act. I tossed my phone on the couch and grabbed the hammer and started wailing on the lock repeatedly. It was like striking an anvil. When the joint finally gave, I uncurled the steel grip from the latch and pulled open the trap door. Down below, I could see a tiny figure, shivering. He was only wearing a white cloth around his waist, and he was stick thin. The basement was completely empty, except for a twin mattress on the floor, and an orange bucket in the corner. I was afraid to go down there, even now, so I reached my hand out for him. Come on, Christian, I'm here to help you. He looked reluctant at first, but eventually started climbing up the steps. When he was close enough, I grabbed him by the forearm and yanked him out of that hole, trying to cover him with my arms as he was absolutely freezing to the touch. A familiar voice from behind startles me. He sounded disappointed. I told you not to open any of the doors. I whirled around and shielded Christian behind me. Is that the man? I could feel the boy shaking. No, I've never seen that man before. Here, buddy, let's get you warmed up. He took Christian's hand and led him to the couch, acting all calm and shit as if I hadn't just discovered a literal kid trapped under the house. A house that he seemed to be in charge of. You're so fucked, I told him, shaking. I'm going to fully cooperate with the police when they get here. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if they think I'm an accomplice. I just wanted you to know that. Roger didn't pay me much mind. Instead, he smiled at the kid and took off his jacket, covering the boy. Hold on tight. All right, for just a little longer. I'll get you something to eat soon. Roger turned towards me. I backed away. Don't you come near me. He put his hands in his pockets and said, I told you not to open any doors. To hell with that. Roger shook his head. We had so much hope for you. You showed so much promise. We? There's more of you in on this? Do you know what this house is? He didn't wait for me to lie. It's a conduit of sorts. A Schrodinger's house, if you will. Nothing truly exists in this reality until one of the doors are opened. Not really. There are many places like this on Earth, and we've watched over them for a really long time. We do this in order to preserve our timeline. Here, walk with me. He brushed past me and left through the front door. I looked at Christian, but the kid was fast asleep. Come on, Roger told me. The kid will still be here, unfortunately. What are you talking about? I asked. A conduit? He leads me down the driveway. That's right. Nothing happens unless a door is opened, and the consequences could be big or small. The pizza guy the other day, if you had opened it, he likely would have gotten a tip. But what he did with that money later is beyond your or even our control. Just like the kid who lost the ball. They could have came in and took a look for themselves, but they would have quickly realized that it was missing for themselves. And who knows what their father would have done. We crossed the street. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because once you know how it works, you can't really watch the house anymore. Not really. It's why I've had to use people like you. There were others. Roger didn't even smile. Okay, fine. Say I believe you. Then why do they start getting angry? Well, some of them. Not the kids, I guess. Wouldn't you start getting angry if you suddenly realized that you weren't going to exist? Unless, of course, you were in a similar situation to Christian's. We had arrived at the house across the street. Roger knocked on the door. A woman answered it, and I immediately recognized her, even though she wasn't smiling this time, nor was there blood dripping down the side of her face. Hello, how can I help you two? Hi, we were wondering if you'd be interested in a termite inspection. Her face went from cheery to stoic in an instant. Oh no, I'm sorry, the homeowner isn't here right now. Maybe you could leave a card or something, and I could give it to them. Roger cracked an award-winning smile. "No, I don't think that'll be necessary as we're only here for a short while. Thank you for your time," and then turned on his heels and walked away. The woman looked at me one last time before slamming the door shut. I caught up to Roger, but she was fine, exactly. But if you had opened the door the other day, her kids would have been killed by her husband. Likely her too, even if you had helped. And you too, if you had opened that door. He's a large guy after all. We climbed the driveway, and Roger stopped short at the door. I could hear the sirens going off in the distance. Christian was sitting upright on the couch, rubbing his eyes. I tried my best not to shake as I entered alone. He looked up at me, and I could do nothing but weep and say, "I am so sorry." Roger was a no-frills type of guy. He was of good posture, stern, and his clothes were crisp down to the French cuffs on his sleeves. His tone was soft and his words direct but polite. I'd known him all but a few seconds before I decided that I could trust this man with my life, which was why I took everything he said quite seriously. I had found the gig online. It was a posting for someone to house sit. I surmised that Roger was likely some kind of property manager and was short-staffed, which was why he had to use a third-party app to fulfill his needs, even if he weren't used to seeking help. Because although he seemed relaxed, a part of me felt as if he was reluctant to let go of the reins easily, which made me think that he was either incredibly passionate about his job or really responsible. Both of which I found to be extremely positive qualities. That concludes the house tour. Now, he clapped his hands together. The fridge, the kitchen, the pantry, the living room, bathrooms, even any of the bedrooms is yours to use. Consume, sleep, relax. It's up to you, but there's one rule that I insist be followed. Yeah, sure, I nodded. Until I get back. Do not open the door. What? I regretted the words the instant they left my lips. No, yeah, okay, yeah. He didn't say another word, only stared at me. No, I get it. I promise I won't open the door until you get back. I like you, kid, and the algorithm thinks you're fit for the job, which I tend to trust these things. So let's be clear here. Do not open the door. It doesn't matter what happens. Don't let anyone inside. Yeah, of course. No, I get it. Some people like to limit their personal spaces. I once went to a friend's house. It was a model home at first, the kind that all the prospective buyers tore right, and my friend's parents never got over the walls. They always complained that all the people that walked in and out of them touched them, seeped their dead skin cells into the walls or something. They even painted over it quite a few times, if I remember correctly. But still, they said it wasn't the same, that it wasn't right. So yeah, I completely understand. Personal space and everything. I respect that. Roger let out a content-filled sigh, and then smiled easily. You're going to do great. He looked at his watch. I had never seen a nicer one, to be honest. Okay, I've got another engagement, so lock the door behind me, and I'll be back. Then without another word, he left. Don't open the doors, I repeated after him. Got it. The house was a good size. I've house sat at others before, mainly to feed their dog or some exotic fish. And although there wasn't much furniture in this one, it felt classy, timeless almost. I walked around to check that all the windows were secured. The sliding door leading to the backyard was closed. The door from the kitchen, which led into the garage, was locked. Before I sat down in the front room and turned on the TV, I was in the middle of watching a rerun of Campfire Tales when I heard my first knock. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping whoever it was would go away. Hello? They knocked again. Do you have a moment for Jesus Christ? Shit, I muttered, getting off the couch. I walked over to the door and leaned in. Yes, I cleared my throat. Hello? Hi, we're with the local church, and we were wondering if you have accepted Jesus into your life. No, I'm sorry, I'm not religious. I lied. If you'd like, we can give you some pamphlets for some light reading. He pulled on the handle. They helped me a lot some time back. And maybe you'd find use for them too. A second voice came next. A lot of people have told us that they have been useful for them, not knowing when they needed it the most. If you could. Sorry, I'm not interested, but thank you. There was a pause. Sure, we get it. But do you mind if we leave you these pamphlets on the door for another member of the household, perhaps? You can grab them whenever you'd like. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. I could hear the paper scraping against the door and saw the handle jiggle slightly before the first voice spoke again. Thanks for your time today. I waited for the sound of their footsteps to disappear before I decided to breathe. I then looked through the peephole to make sure they were gone. My hand instinctively reached for the handle to grab the pamphlets, as I didn't want the house to look untidy from the outside. I had no sooner touched the knob before I remembered what Roger said. But no one's here, I said aloud. Still, I'd technically be breaking the rule. I couldn't help but smile. When did you get to be such a stickler for rules? I said to myself, feeling rather proud as I returned to the couch and clicked through a few movie titles on stream before settling on an old classic. I don't know how far I got into the movie before I heard another knock on the door. What are the chances, I thought. What a busy house. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping they would go away. Hello? A voice came from outside. Pizza delivery. My stomach growled. I looked up at the clock. It was past noon. The only problem was I didn't order any pizza. Hello? Pizza delivery! They knocked again. I've got a double pepperoni and a pineapple pizza. For Roger? I got up from the couch again. Roger didn't tell me that this gig included lunch. Hold on just a minute. I shouted, I'm coming! I looked through the peephole as I reached for the door handle. But something wasn't right. I could feel it. Was this a test? Had Roger called the local pizzeria to make sure that I wasn't breaking his one simple rule? If I did, would that mean I wouldn't get paid? I looked through the peephole again. It was a young guy, younger than me, but looked old enough to drive. He wore a dark blue polo that had curled collars at the edge and was holding up a red insulated bag. I didn't order any pizza. I could see the kid sigh before looking at the receipt. Is this 226? Yeah. Well, I've got a pizza here for you. For Roger? Yeah, for Roger. Well, I'm not Roger. But this is 226? It is. Look, the pizza's already been paid for. If you don't want to tip me, that's fine. I just have to get to my next delivery. He waited. I didn't budge. I'm going to leave it here. He directed toward a half pillar on the porch, shaking his head as he grabbed 2 boxes and set them down before zipping up his delivery pouch. Cheap ass, he muttered. I felt my stomach growl again as I watched him walk away. And walk away. Now, I failed to mention this earlier, but the peephole oversaw the entire driveway and most of the sidewalk. So when the guy walked out of sight, he was a good house down before I could no longer see him. The thing was, I never saw his delivery vehicle either. I looked at the pizza sitting on the half pillar. A few cheap paper plates were stacked on top, and I could see the packets of Parmesan being warmed up. I took a deep breath in hopes to stave off my urges, but that only made it worse as the smell permeated through the door. It was pizza, all right. I would bet my life on that one. But still, I didn't open the door. Instead, I got back on the couch and turned down the volume on the TV. In fact, I got to about 3 volume before I decided to mute the thing outright, and began to watch my movie in complete silence. Some time passes and I ate some burritos I found in the freezer. I was mid-bite into this double-stuffed cheese burrito when the sound of 2 kids outside the door could be heard. No, you knock. No, come on, you do it. Hey, it's your ball. Fine. This kid knocked on the door. Hello? He shouted loudly. I'm sorry for disturbing you, but our ball went over your fence. Do you think you could get it for us? I didn't move a muscle. Another knock came. Hello? Maybe they would go away. Hello? He knocked again. We can hear you. Yeah, no, we can hear you chewing. I swallowed my last bite roughly and wiped my hands on my jeans. I leaned into the peephole to see two kids about 7 or 8 standing outside. They had on shorts and t-shirts and looked a little muddy. The other kid's voice rang through as I approached. Come on, please. We just want our ball back. I'm sorry, but I can't help you right now. I'm busy. Could you come back later? Please. The first kid begged. Could you help us? My dad's about to come home soon, and he's going to be so mad if I told him I lost another ball. I looked into the peephole again and saw that the kid looked nervous, scared even. He was wringing his hands. Fuck, I muttered under my breath. Okay, hold on. Let me go take a look. I hollered. Then I walked toward the back and glanced around the yard. Sure enough, a bright red ball with a yellow star on it sat in the grass near the fence. I grabbed the handle before debating with myself. It's technically a door, right? Sliding door. Sliding door. I played with the words in my mouth. It's right in the name. It's a sliding door. I chuckled. That's like asking if water's wet. But still, the sound of the kid worrying rang in my ear, and I didn't want him to get into trouble. And I had my hand on the door when I also noticed a football laying on its side nearby. I walked halfway between the sliding door and the front door and shouted, "Which ball is yours?" "What?" I shouted through the door. "What kind of ball do you have?" There was a pause. "A basketball," the second kid said. I went back to the sliding door and scanned the grass before going back. "Sorry, kids. I can't help you out. There's no basketball back there." "No, doofus," the first kid whispered. "It's a soccer ball," he yelled. I shook my head. "No soccer balls either." "Please, could you open the door and let us take a look? Maybe you missed it." I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. "No, I'm sorry. I can't help you right now. Maybe if you come back later." "No, you don't understand," the first kid cried. "I need that ball. My dad's going to be so mad at me." "Yeah," the second kid chimed in. "Please, could you just let us take a look?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm sorry." One of the kids kicked the door before I heard them running away. I breathed a sigh of relief and unclenched my fist. I didn't even know I was tense until just now. "It's just a door," I said, as I returned to the couch. "It's just a silly rule." But I turned off the TV and sat there in silence, too afraid to make a sound, too afraid to even finish my burrito. I didn't have to wait long before I got off the couch again. At first it was 2 shots in the air, then 3 more in succession. I could hear a car alarm go off somewhere in the neighborhood. But the sound of a gun going off seemed unusual, as this was a rather nice area. Someone screamed in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from across the street. I bolted upright and rushed to the door, peering through the eye-hole, where I saw a woman barging out of her door, her dress clumped in one hand so she could run. She looked terrified as she crossed the street barefoot, up the driveway, toward the porch, and slammed her fist into the door. "Help! Please! Help me!" she screamed. "I need help. Please! Call 911. She banged on the door again. "My husband's trying to kill me." I could see the fear in her eyes as she kept looking back at her house. The door shook again. "Help me. Please! Open the door!" I don't know when my hand had left my sides, but when I looked down, they were gripping the handle so hard that my knuckles were white. "Please. He's coming!" But I waited. "Someone..." She banged on the door. "Help!" And waited. But no one came out of her house. The two of us stood there. The woman's frantic knocking ebbed as the minutes passed. Was it 2 minutes now? 5 perhaps? I'm not sure. But eventually she stopped banging on the door. I looked into the peephole and saw her chin had dropped to her head. And she was smiling. I tried to look away, but she moved closer. Slowly, but closer toward the door until her eyes were staring directly into the peephole. "I see you." I nearly fell over backwards as the door suddenly began to shake. The thing looked like it was going to buck right off from the frame. I crawled backwards on my hands and feet until my back hit the side of the couch. Open. There.
Door!
I shook my head, too terrified to move, and waited until the knocking stopped. The sun was still out when the woman first came. It was now barely visible through the windows. Dusk had settled on the house and all of the lights were out, even the TV. I was still on the floor, hugging my knees, when a knock came at the door. It was softer and quiet, dignified even. Hello? It was Roger's voice. Hey,
I'm back!
I was so glad to hear him that I immediately rushed to the door. He knocked again just before I could reach the handle. Could you open the door? The words froze me in my steps. Roger? Hey, yeah, it's me. Let me in. Roger? I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it looked like Roger. Hey, come on, could you let me in? It's cold outside. Don't you have the key? He reached into his pockets and then shook his head. Nope, I must have left them at the office. Then he looked at me and flashed an award-winning smile. Hey, you didn't take what I said that seriously, did you? Before turning around and noticed the pizza boxes tilted on the half pillar. Wow, I guess you did. He smirked. We're definitely going to have to use you again soon. He picked up the boxes and palmed the door handle. Now could you please open the door? I shook my head. No, you explicitly told me not to open the door. Yeah, he told me, and you did a great job. Might have took it too literally, but I appreciate that sort of thing. But come on. Hey, it's me. Open the door. Why don't you have the key? He shrugged. I don't know. It was busy today and I must have forgotten them. He reached around his pants before pulling out a set from his breast pocket. Oh, look. I thought I had them, but these are the wrong ones. He waited. Now come on, open the door. I shook my head and backed away. Open the
Door!
The frame shook. Look, I'm not playing around anymore. Open the door before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing. Your gig's over now.
Go home!
No, I told him. Open the fucking door, man. His yelling was so loud it made the door rattle, and then the entire house started shaking. I squatted on the floor and covered my ears, my teeth shivering in my mouth as I prayed that he would go away. I was so scared that I was even too afraid to cry. But eventually the shaking stopped, and the house was quiet again. I sat there for nearly an hour before I forced myself to sit back on the couch, where I once again heard the door handle jiggle, and the sound of metal in the lock before it turned and clicked open. Roger walked through the door, looking as calm and pristine as ever. He had on an award-winning smile as he looked at me. Hey, you made it. He beamed, pulling out a stack of money from his pocket. I knew you would, and handed me $800. We're going to have to use you again next time. Story 2. I found an endless hole on some land I recently bought. It changes anything I send down in bizarre ways. I recently bought some land and a small cabin on the outskirts of Frost Hollow. The town had been in decline for decades. A constant stream of businesses and people left Frost Hollow every year. I heard rumors about high missing persons rates, as well as insane homicide and suicide rates that plagued the town constantly. This didn't bother me in the least, however. In my mind, it just meant the land there was dirt cheap, and that I wouldn't have too many neighbors to worry about. My closest neighbor, Art, was a sheep farmer, an ancient man with a cantankerous voice and a back like a broken board. He stood only about 5 feet tall, always wearing his trademark blue coveralls and a wide-brim hat. When I first found the hole, I tried shining a light down and then throwing heavy rocks inside. When only silence greeted me after a minute, I quickly realized that neither method would help me realize the depth of the hole. I immediately went over to Art's ranch house. Art had lived in Frost Hollow his whole life, and I figured if anyone would know about the pit, he would. Sheep milled about on the grassy fields around his house, meditatively chewing as they slowly ambled forward. Art and I both lived on top of the same hill, on a spot cleared of trees and brush about 1/10 of a mile across on the peak. My dog, Peaches, ran by my side, her mouth wide open in excitement and dripping with silver streams of saliva. I saw Art sitting on his porch of his weather-worn home, smoking a pipe and staring out across the field. His eyes ratcheted to me when the rickety porch steps groaned in protest under my weight. All of the paint had long ago peeled off the walls and shutters of his ancient home. "Joshua," he said in a thick drawl, "how are you settling in?" He took another long drag from the pipe. Smoke wreathed his face and white beard. He reminded me of a thin, diminutive Santa Claus. "It's very interesting," I admitted. The cabin still had books and trinkets left behind from the previous owner. It seemed like whoever it was had left in a hurry. I was happy to find leather-bound hardcover works by Robert Browning, T.S. Eliot and others when I first purveyed the bookshelves. But I'm really wondering about the hole, the one with the retaining wall around it. What is it? I figured it wasn't a well, for this hole was about 10 feet across and seemed to go down for at least 400 or 500 feet. The top of it was ringed by a perfectly circular stone wall a few feet high, presumably to keep people or animals from falling in by accident. "If I knew that, I would be a wise man indeed," Art whispered sagely. "That hole has been there for as long as anyone knows, before the town was even started. It doesn't seem to have any bottom that we can see. A few people who live around here have used to get rid of their trash for decades. We just throw whatever rubbish we have into the hole and voila, it's gone forever, though my wife never trusted it, at least before she died. Maria always asked me not to go near it." I frowned. Art rarely talked about his dead wife. I knew she had passed away a few years earlier, but he refused to share any of the details of her death. "That could potentially poison the groundwater," I said. "I'd like to ask you to stop throwing trash in the hole until I can get it looked at. I think Maria may have been right to be leery about abusing the pit." Art leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Sonny, wells around here never go below 200 or 300 feet. I can guarantee you that pit is neither a well in any conventional sense, nor connected to the underground reservoirs. As far as we've been able to tell, the walls are solid all the way down. They turn into some sort of glassy sandstone, and they go deep, at least a few thousand feet down." "How do you know all this?" I asked, curious. "Have you been studying it?" His expression brightened at this. "The previous owner of your cabin, Mel, asked me and a couple others to come over. This was back around 2001, I guess, the first time I saw it. We did a few experiments, ran some lines to try to see how far down it went. We never did figure out where the bottom was, if it even has a bottom, but there were other weird effects from sending things down," Art said. "Like what?" I asked. He winked at me. "Meet me there in an hour at sunset and I'll show you," he said. I woke Peaches up and headed back to my cabin. She barked excitedly by my side, running circles around me playfully. I went to the hole early, watching and waiting as night descended. In the cloudless sky, the stars came out one by one, faintly twinkling like broken glass. I must have gotten lost in a trance, because the next thing I knew, Art was putting a small, bird-like hand on my shoulder. His ancient fingers trembled nervously, though I didn't know why. I saw him carrying a threadbare canvas bag around his shoulder. With a grunt, he put it down on the black earth surrounding the stone walls of the hole. I had left Peaches outside to run around and tire herself out. "What's all this?" I asked, feeling a creeping suspicion rise up my spine. Art gave his inscrutable Santa Claus smile, pulling his dirty pipe out of a pocket and lighting it. "You'll see," he said, pulling a long, heavy rope out of the bag. At the end, it was tied to a closed wicker basket. He kept reaching into the canvas bag, and his hand came up with a plastic grocery bag filled to the brim with ice. It had been tied and knotted. He looked back at me as he gingerly lowered the ice into the wicker basket. "You wanted to know what the hole is?" he asked, handing me the rope. "Let this basket drop down as far as the rope will go, and maybe you'll see for yourself." Together, we lowered the basket down into the hole. The darkness swallowed it instantly, like a hungry mouth. I wondered what kind of game Art was playing. I figured that by the time we raised it, we would have a basket filled with melted ice and nothing more. "It doesn't always work, you understand," Art said. "But when it does, well, it's one of the goddamned strangest things I've ever seen." We reached the end of the rope, let the basket hang for a few seconds, and then started pulling it back up. The whole process took a couple minutes. "You know there are dozens of types of ice?" Art asked as we struggled with the rope. "Some kinds of ice are burning hot and will scald your flesh from your bones. Others are as hard as steel and as cold as liquid nitrogen. Bizarre, huh? On Earth, we don't really see them, but on other planets, under high pressure, ice can take some truly alien forms." I watched the basket rise out of the shadows, appearing suddenly as if it had broken through the surface of a dark ocean. There seemed to be a light coming from inside of it. Carefully, we pulled it out and laid it next to the stone wall. "Go ahead," Art said, sitting down on the wall's ledge with a huff. It gave me vertigo just seeing him there, on the edge of an abyss that stretched thousands of feet. Art apparently had no fear of heights, however. He pulled out his pipe and lit a match. "Well, what are you waiting for? You wanted answers. Open it up and see for yourself." I knelt down next to the wicker basket. I inhaled deeply as I raised one of the covers, flipping it over in a heartbeat. I stared down in amazement at what I saw. The ice cubes were all still in their original shape, but now they looked like they were burning with an inner fire. Orange light flickered from the insides of them, twisting and spiraling in tiny cyclones. I saw they had totally melted the plastic bag, and by this point were starting to leave scorch marks on the wicker. Black smoke rose from the basket. Art stepped forward, taking a gnarled old hand and flipping the basket over before the burning ice could ignite the material. "What is it?" I asked, backing away from the ice cubes. Art shrugged, getting up with a creaking of bones and a heavy groan. "To be honest, Joshua, I can't give you all the answers," he said. "The story with the hole is long and very weird. We don't know where it came from or why it does what it does. Mel and I experimented with it for years. He even tried sending live animals down there." Art's wrinkled face seemed to go pale at the memory. "What happened when he sent an animal down there?" I asked, intensely curious, but also somewhat sickened. Art just shook his head. "I don't want to talk about that," he said. "Just pretend I never brought it up. Some things are better left forgotten." Art left a few minutes later. He gave a friendly wave as he disappeared into the night, but I was far too focused on the burning cubes to pay him any attention. I ran back to my house, trying to find a way to transport them. I found a shovel and ran back, gingerly picking them up with it. I wanted to keep them for observation. I had a small wood-burning stove in the cabin and threw the fiery ice cubes into the cold ashes. As I threw logs on top of them, the wood ignited as if it had been soaked in gasoline, sending sputtering blue flames up. I was sitting down in front of the strange fire show when I heard high-pitched squeals of pain split the air. I instantly recognized the yelping cries of Peaches. I grabbed a shotgun from next to the door and ran outside. The growls and barking had formed into a deafening screech by this point. My eyes widened in horror as I realized what was happening. A brown bear had Peaches by the neck. Its powerful jaws crushed the pit bull's flesh in an instant, and Peaches' cries faded to a whisper, the light in her pupils slowly dying. I felt sick waves of nostalgia seeing Peaches standing there, chunks of her neck still missing from the bear attack. I had to constantly remind myself that this was not Peaches. This was some abomination from the pit, some dark twisting of my innocent dog's flesh. Oh God, Maria was right. Art whispered in a voice choked with emotion. We should have never come back here. He grabbed my arm with an iron grip, his terror giving his frail hands a seemingly superhuman strength. Peaches and Miguel didn't move. They simply stood there, wavering on their feet, their eyes as blank as those of corpses. Let's just go, I whispered back. They're not moving. I'm not even sure there's any consciousness there behind those blank eyes. They remind me of zombies. They might just stay there. But as soon as we took a step away from Miguel and Peaches, they came to life. I heard a long, low hissing sound that tore its way out of their throats in unison. It echoed like the hissing of many snakes. These things must have been what murdered my wife, Art mumbled, more to himself than to me. A look of shock fell over his wrinkled face. Oh God, it was the pit all along. All of the misfortune and tragedies. It's the center of all of it. I was about to respond when the corpses took off after us with a vengeance. Peaches sprinted forward, the sound of grinding bone splinters in her shattered canine body rising in volume as she came at us. But none of the reanimated corpses seemed to feel any pain. Miguel blindly staggered forward, lunging in strange, dragging steps. The crimson maggots eating away at his body had reached his face and eyes by this point, leaving small rivulets of cold gore wherever they feasted. "Fuck! Keep it away from me!" Art screamed, taking off as fast as his old man's body would allow. With his pronounced limp, he didn't stand a chance. I sprinted away, passing the old man in seconds. A moment later, I heard a heavy thud and a whoosh of air. I glanced back, seeing Peaches standing on the prone man's chest. She ripped at his shoulder and arms, tearing off chunks of flesh with every bite. Art wailed like a man being burned alive. The red maggots continuously fell off Peaches' body. To my horror, I saw them instantly start burrowing their way into Art's body, slithering into his mouth and nose. Miguel was only a few feet behind the struggling pair, coming straight at me. I headed towards my cabin, trying to block out the dying screams of Art. I flew through the door, slamming it shut behind me. A single heartbeat later, I heard Miguel's body thud into the other side. Frantically, I threw my weight against it and locked it. I lunged for my shotgun, which I always kept propped up next to the door. One of the windows next to the door shattered. I saw a bloody hand reaching in. Miguel blindly climbed up on the sharp shards of glass, ripping open his stomach and chest in the process. Fresh waterfalls of clotted gore and dancing worms slowly dribbled down his mutilated flesh. Another window shattered a moment later. A pale, white hand reached in. I saw the reanimated body of Art, his filmy, dead eyes rolling back and forth over the room of my cabin. When they saw me, they stopped, focusing on me with an insane ferocity. Miguel slunk towards me, his skin a carpet of writhing red maggots now. They skittered all over my wooden floor, slowly crawling towards me, hungry for living tissue. I raised the gun, pointing it at his face. It was half gone by this point, the jawbone hanging limply from a mass of half-digested flesh. I fired, blowing the skull-like face into a mist of blood and bone splinters. And yet, even missing most of his face, Miguel didn't stop. Bleeding heavily as his brains leaked out of his forehead, he staggered forward, grabbing at me. I took the stock of the shotgun and slammed it into the bullet wound in the front of his head. There was a sickening, wet crunch as he fell back, his hands blindly swiping the air in an attempt to reach me. He continued gurgling and hissing blood. Art had nearly finished crawling into the other window by this point. Out of ideas, I took the opportunity to escape towards the back of the cabin, away from these reanimated bodies. I saw my car parked on the side of the cabin, only about 20 feet away. I looked both ways out of the back door before flinging it open and sprinting towards freedom. The coast looked clear. But as I reached the door, a heavy thudding of paws came running around the side of the cabin. Peaches snapped at the air with an insane bloodlust, her fur skittering with a carpet of maggots. I pointed the shotgun at her, constantly reminding myself that this was not the real Peaches. She lunged forward, grabbing my ankle as I fired. The bullet ripped her back apart, revealing part of the spine and ribs. The white bone poked out through the ragged strands of flesh for a few moments, until the crimson maggots skittered over the wound and covered it. I felt a burning pain as her powerful jaws bit into my leg. She shook her head from side to side, nearly throwing me off my feet. The pain radiated up my left leg. More small agonies like burning drops of lava covered my arms and hands. I realized that some of the biting maggots had landed on me. In a fit of pure panic, I grabbed the shotgun and shoved the metal barrel into one of Peach's eyes. The orb exploded in a dribble of vitreous fluid before I fired. Peach's head disintegrated under the onslaught of the buckshot. I felt her jaws release a second later. Staggering back, I stumbled towards the car. I flung open the door and slammed it shut, locking it. I looked down at my arms, seeing the worms eating their way down towards the muscle, biting through the skin with terrifying efficiency. Quickly, I began plucking them out, squishing them between my fingers. They exploded like tiny water balloons filled with blood. I looked up, seeing that Miguel, Art and Peaches all stood in front of the car. They looked like little more than ragged pieces of decaying flesh by this point. I started the car and accelerated rapidly towards them, hoping to crush all these eldritch creatures in one fell swoop. All three lunged to the side, twisting in jerky, zombie-like movements. Even without faces, Miguel and Peaches were still incredibly fast. Without looking back, I drove away, leaving the pit and its many strange mysteries behind forever. Her eyes rolled back in her head. I raised the shotgun and sprayed a round of buckshot at the bear. Its rolling eyes turned towards me, its sharp fangs gnashing as it dropped Peach's twitching body. It started sprinting straight at me with an insane expression of bloodlust on its crazed, furry face. Everything seemed to slow down as I met the creature's eyes and shot it in the mouth. It stopped in its tracks, dripping thick streams of blood from its chin and neck. A single heartbeat later, it turned and sprinted back towards the dark forest in a blur, leaving the dead body of Peaches in its wake. Sickened by the brutal death of my beloved Peaches, I wiped tears away as I went inside to grab a comforter. I wrapped her mutilated, bleeding form in the thick blanket and drove the dog's corpse over to the hole. "Goodbye, Peaches," I said in a voice choked with emotion. I had wrapped the dog up like a mummy. Her body felt heavy and stiff. I inhaled deeply, heaving as I pushed Peaches up on the retaining wall. I felt her cooling blood soaking through the comforter. After resting for a moment, I slid Peaches over the edge, watching her tumble down into the endless darkness. Her body fell straight down without hitting any of the rocky sides. Within a few moments, Peaches had disappeared forever, or so I thought at the time. I remembered waking up early the next morning, hearing a heavy rhythmic bouncing and thudding coming from the direction of the pit. I blinked my eyes blearily, seeing the first bloody streaks of dawn covering the world like a blanket. Then I remembered Peach's death the previous night and the strangeness with the hole. Sadness and anxiety crushed my heart at the memory. The sound of grunting and hard thuds came bouncing back again. I threw on some clothes, running outside to see what was making such a racket. I saw a Mexican-looking fellow unloading a truck full of bald, damaged tires into the hole. He was whistling as he worked, his tanned face gleaming with sweat. He had backed the bed of the rusty pickup to the perimeter of the retaining wall. The thudding sound was the tires smashing off the sides of the smooth, rocky walls as they tumbled endlessly down. "Hey!" I yelled, striding forward with long steps. He glanced back at me, his expression never changing. He just continued clearing out the dozens of tires stacked up 5 feet high in the bed. "Morning," he responded cheerfully. "You're up early, eh?" "Because of you. Who are you? What are you doing on my property?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at the intruder. He stretched out a thin, grime-streaked hand. I stared down at it as if it were a dead slug. "My name's Miguel, and I've been coming here for years. Man," he said in a thick accent, "I've thrown thousands of tires down here. No one cares. The dumps will pay you to take them off their hands. They don't want to deal with the red tape, right?" "Thousands?" I asked, chagrined. Miguel just nodded proudly. I tried to imagine how much junk must be at the bottom of the hole. There must be hundreds of feet of decaying animals, rusting machinery, flat tires, and whatever other garbage was unlucky enough to find itself eternally imprisoned in this endless pit. Miguel opened his mouth, about to say something, but his words were cut off as a cacophonous wail tore its way up and out of the hole. The eerie scream had a grating, metallic quality to it. I felt goosebumps rise all over my body as Miguel's eyes widened. He stared down into the eternal shadows. Leaning over the retaining wall, the shrieking ended as abruptly as it had started. "What the?" he started to say, his bronze skin appearing much paler than when I had first seen him. His brown eyes stared ahead, unbelieving and frightened. The screaming started again, much closer and louder. It sent shockwaves of sound traveling up through the air. I saw the retaining wall shake like a leaf on a tree. A moment later, it crumbled and fell to pieces before my eyes. The metallic wailing faded off again, abruptly plunging us into deafening silence. Miguel gave a loud shriek of surprise and terror as his arms windmilled crazily. He tried to catch himself as the black, lifeless soil surrounding the hole crumbled beneath his feet. I instinctively threw myself back as more and more earth slid into the hole. Miguel tried to crawl up the loose sand, his eyes wide with animal panic. He reached out a trembling hand towards me, but the sands underneath him were flowing like a waterfall. I reached my hand toward him in a futile attempt, watching his rolling eyes as he slid down and disappeared in a single instant. His scream echoed up for what seemed like a very long time. After a minute, it grew fainter and, eventually, disappeared. I stood in stunned silence, staring down at the hole. The entire retaining wall had fallen in, leaving jagged pieces of stone poking out of the earth like broken teeth. As usual, the pit had eaten everything hungrily. There was no sign of the life it had consumed so suddenly, no change in the thick curtain of shadows. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but a sharp feeling of disappointment pierced my chest. Though I wasn't sure why, I stared between the rusted brown pickup truck and the hole, as if expecting a magic trick to take place. My thoughts slowly returned in a jumbled mess, a stream of consciousness garble that told me to find help. I sprinted blindly across the dead earth towards the grassy fields surrounding Art's rickety house. Art was already out under the bleary, early morning sun, letting the sheep stream out in excited lines from the wooden barn out back. Sweating and hyperventilating, I gave a high-pitched, terrified yell. He jumped, spinning around to look at me. "Art!" Something bad's happened at the pit. "Someone fell in," I screamed. His face turned chalk white, his thin, bird-like face falling into a pensive, serious frown. He slowly ambled toward me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Show me," he said simply. Art followed behind, his old man's gait slowed by a pronounced limp. It seemed to take forever to head back toward the pit. He saw the rusty pickup from a distance, his small, watery eyes widening. "Oh shit, it's Miguel," he whispered grimly. I saw the collapsed retaining wall. The bed of the pickup truck was still open, patiently parked a few feet away from the place where the soil had collapsed like a melting glacier. Yeah, I talked to him for a few minutes. I said, not bringing up the tires. A dozen bald, flat tires still sat waiting in the bed of the truck. Shit. What am I supposed to do? Call the cops? Art froze at this, his normally placid face falling into a grimace. His eyes met mine, as cold and blue as an Alaskan glacier. Do not call the police, he said, his tone steelier than I had ever heard it. If the government finds out about this, they will steal your land and probably murder you, and maybe murder me just for good measure. Hell, look what happened to Frank Olson during M-Cultra. The US government threw him out a window and made it look like a suicide just to prevent the media from finding out that the CIA was torturing and drugging US citizens, giving them LSD and subjecting them to prolonged physical and sexual abuse. And that was just over LSD. What will they do if they find this? We have no idea what kind of power lives down there. So what? We're just going to pretend like nothing happened? I spat back, my face flushing. What about that guy's family? They'll never know where he went. Art just shook his head. Trust me, Joshua, it's far better to leave them in the dark. If they get involved, they might find themselves getting thrown down the pit as well. Art pointed to the pickup truck with a shaking finger. Just put it in neutral and roll it inside. Get rid of the evidence. No one ever needs to know what lies rotting at the bottom of that abyss. Art watched me with an amused half smile as I got into the pickup truck. The entire cab smelled like tacos and French fries. I saw discarded fast food wrappers all over the seats and floor. Disgusting, I muttered, starting the engine and putting it in neutral. The engine idled like an old man with pneumonia, gurgling and sputtering in rhythmic waves. I jumped out onto the soft black soil. Deep down, I knew Art was right, though I still felt sick and guilty about covering up this man's death. I imagined Miguel's broken body down there among the thousands of tires, twisted among the rubble with a silent scream still frozen on his lips. Can you give me a hand with this? I asked Art as I got behind the truck, preparing to start pushing. I glanced over, but he wasn't looking at me or the pickup truck. He stared intently past me with a look of horror. I followed his line of sight, seeing he was staring at the border of the dark evergreen forest 50 or 60 feet away. My eyes instantly met those of Miguel's, but he seemed different. I squinted, seeing his eyes were white, crying scarlet tears that streamed down his face. His jaw looked shattered. It hung limply open, sharp pieces of bone poking out through the skin. His clothes were ripped and stained in a rainbow of dark fluids. Oil spot rainbows glimmered next to drippings of thick, clotted blood. Peaches stood by his side, but like Miguel, the dog had changed in death. Her eyes had lost their pupils and irises. Under the dim dawn light, they gleamed a pale, cataract white. Bloody saliva frothed from her silently gnashing jaws. But that wasn't the most horrifying thing. Thousands of blood-red worms ate away at their loose flesh. They fell from Miguel's gray, lifeless skin like raindrops in a heavy storm. Each looked about the size of a maggot, as the carpet of squirming larvae ate away at their hosts. New streams of clotted blood slowly ran down their bodies with the consistency of sludge. Story 3. I accidentally drew the wrath of a terrifying family of Bigfoot while camping. I mad-dashed through the woods, tripping, scraping, and slamming into twisted, dense foliage. I couldn't think over my own loud breathing. It vibrated through my whole body, deafening. Then something slammed into me and sent me colliding into a tree. I fell to the dirt, everything around me blurry. I was bleeding all over but didn't know from where. A large silhouette loomed over me. I then woke up. That was the nightmare I had right before the incident. At the time, it felt real and shook me up a bit, but I was already shaken up pretty bad. My dog, my best friend, died 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't even close to recovering. At that time, Jet was my family. She was 14. She had a good life and was well taken care of. My wife and I never had kids, so Jet was our baby. I was married. But my wife died 2 years ago. I will never recover from that. I lay there in bed, not wanting to get up, I was kind of in this coma-like depression for days. I didn't want to do anything but lie in bed and watch anything that would make me forget for at least a little while. I was expected to go back to work next week. I really didn't know how that would happen and was debating on just quitting. But that was for my future self to deal with. I had an anniversary to focus on, so I dragged my bag of bones out of bed. I picked up Jet's ashes from the crematorium I took her to. She was a 50-pound blue healer. I went home and divided up her ashes into two. One would stay at the place. The other was coming with me on my trip. I then packed up my small SUV and drove off into the deep wilderness. The city we lived in was at the edge of a massive forest. Some of it BLM land, Bureau of Land Management. Some of it private, some of it federal park. It was a giant patchwork that went for hundreds of miles. It took me about 3 hours to get to where I wanted to get. It was a very off-grid campsite on BLM land, Jet's favorite place on the planet. At least that's what my impression always was. We would come here with my wife. Those were really good times. It was only a 30-yard walk from parking my car to the campsite. I set up a small fire pit and a tent. I was planning on only staying one night. 3 years back on the day, before Emma died, the sky was gorgeous with stars and there was an epic meteor shower. As my wife and I sat there watching this beautiful celestial show, Jet sat next to us and watched as well. The three of us sat there for hours stargazing. My wife and I would hoot and holler, and Jet would bark at the best shooting stars. So, I was going to wait until it got dark to spread Jet's ashes there, along with a little bit of my wife's. I brought with me a cot, some food, and my revolver with dozens of rounds. I was out in the middle of nowhere, with the closest ranger station being over 200 miles away. There were grizzlies and mountain lions in the nearby hills, but I was always more worried about the people who didn't want to be found. Maybe I was becoming one of them. I was having lots of thoughts about my purpose in life, and if I even wanted to be on the planet anymore. I lost my parents a while back. Not because they died, but because they were a-holes. One was a narcissist dick. The other was a manipulating witch. One of the best things I ever did in my life was cut them off. But now I truly had nobody. All my grandparents had died when I was young, and my parents stopped talking to their siblings and cousins decades ago. It was as if they wanted our lineage to end. I had a effed up family. Emma and Jet were everything to me. Emma lost her parents when she was young. I had some friends. My best friend moved across the country for a job last year. You could say that I was in a very dark space. That night I ate, drank and watched the stars. I then spread Jet's and Emma's ashes. I won't lie, I cried a lot. At one point, it seemed like I was a volcano. For the last few days before, I hadn't been crying, but for the past few months, I had cried every day since I found out about Jet's aggressive cancer. I think I was pent up and ready to explode. It did help me go to sleep that night, that and a liter of Jack Daniels. I can't remember now if I woke up and heard it, or if it woke me up, but I heard the smashing of glass. It came from where my car was and sounded like a windshield breaking. I then heard a loud bang. It was like something heavy hitting the metal on the SUV and denting it. Neither sounded good. The sounds were relentless. It was like someone was bombarding my car. More glass shattered. I grabbed my gun and peeked out of the tent. There was a half moon in the sky, so it wasn't pitch dark, but I couldn't see much in the shadows of the forest canopy. My campfire was completely dead as I had extinguished it. I kept hearing my car being under siege. I thought of two options: firing my gun into the sky or moving closer and try to see more. I then fired my gun into the air. Pop, pop, pop. I quickly reloaded my 5-chamber. I grabbed a handful of bullets and put them in my pocket and grabbed my phone. The noise at my car stopped. I stood there quietly inside my tent, but my head, gun and camera peeking out. I scanned the area with both my eyes and lens. An eerie silence spread over the murky land. There was not a sound in the air. I then heard a creak. Something whizzed by my head, loud and fast. I then heard another, and it dawned on me that something was throwing things at me. And that's when I got nailed in the shoulder. I fell back into the tent, my shoulder on fire. I saw what hit me as it rolled across the tent. It was a rock around the size of a baseball. My phone was on the ground next to it, completely shattered. I then heard footsteps outside. Something was charging my tent. It was the adrenaline that gave me the kick. I got up, went to the opening, and looked out. A hairy, humanoid shadow was sprinting at me. I fired off 3 rounds right at him. I think one landed. I was a pretty good shot, as I'd go regularly to a shooting range. The human-like something changed course and dashed into some nearby bushes. It stayed there, in a dense patch of green shadows. But then a rock ripped out of the darkness at me. I moved, and I think it barely missed my face as it zipped past my ear like a hummingbird. I fired my last 2 rounds at the spot, then quickly reloaded and fired off 5 more. I reloaded and waited, watching the shrubs and bushes sway slightly in the wind, their branches clicking. Nothing else moved for what seemed like an eternity. I then said, "Who are you?" I know that's so lame, but I think that's pretty much all I said over and over again. I was focused on the shadows. But then I heard this awful sound come from there. It wasn't human, but it also wasn't animal. It was a cry. It then cried out louder. That's when I heard another cry in the forest, a deeper one. But then the beast closer to me stopped. The cry from the distant forest rang out again, but the one nearby didn't respond. Again, the distant cry came, but more distraught. The only reply it got was 2 other different cries. I realized that there was at least 3 more of these things, and that they were all around me. I knew I had to get the hell out of there. I put on my shoes and readied a backpack as fast as possible. I thought about going to my car. The unresponsive beast was right between my tent and my car. Nonetheless, I was going for it. But then I hesitated, as I thought it could be a trap. The absurdity of the moment gripped me. All my life I wanted to see a Bigfoot, and now I was being attacked by them. The universe really just wanted to end me, and maybe I should have taken the clue right there. Instead, I scooped up my busted phone and took it with me, even though its screen was shattered. I readied my gun and ran to my car. As I moved past the bushes, I saw the thing sprawled on the ground. Even though its fur was dark, I could see it was very wet on the chest. It was red blood. The thing didn't move. I broke in my tracks. Crazy as it sounds, I had to get a better look, as I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The beast must have been a wretched, missing link. It had dark brown fur, was over 6 feet tall and 220 pounds. It was lean but muscular, had long arms, a thick brow, and a gorilla's snout. It didn't move at all. I was pretty sure it was dead. I tried to use my phone, as I could tell it was still powered on. I tried double-clicking the side, which would auto bring up the camera mode. I hit the screen, hoping that maybe my phone would get one good pic, as the camera lens wasn't cracked. A terrifying howl ripped through the night like thunder. It came from nearby. I turned and saw a larger beast's silhouette about 15 yards away. It was next to my vehicle and was seemingly staring at me. I stood frozen. I remember clenching my gun so tight that my nails punctured my flesh. The thing then ran like a giant ape and flipped my car over. The funny thing about this was, at that moment, I remember thinking that Emma and I should have really bought the one I wanted, a much heavier Ford Bronco. I fired my gun into the air, all 5 rounds. The thing froze and watched me like a statue. I quickly reloaded. I then heard 2 other beasts coming out of the woods at me. I was in the process of reloading and dropped a few bullets. I thought about firing on them, but they were surrounding me. I had one opening to escape. Something whizzed by my head. So I mad dashed into denser woods. Thankfully, it was flat land. The beasts were right behind me. I bolted a good 50 to 60 yards. I was somehow pulling away from them, but my cardio was shit at that time. I knew if I had to keep running, I'd be done for. One of them was faster than the others. It kept getting closer, and I would fire on it, and it would quickly dodge behind trees. I could hear rocks whistling around me. I think one hit me in the back, but my backpack absorbed it. I then got to the edge of a large pool of water tangled with tall grass. I stayed on the edge of this murky wetlands and continued to run. I heard the beasts shriek while they chased me. They kept throwing rocks. I wildly fired my gun back at them. I never could get a clean shot, as one was always hurling rocks or flanking me. Their pace was increasing as mine was slowing. One must have picked up a handful of smaller rocks as I felt them pelt me. As they closed in, I then plunged into the bog, knee-deep. The water's edge was a thick, murky soup. Clearer water lay deeper away. Agitated and shrieking, the beasts stayed on the water's edge. They threw rocks as I quickly wadded towards deeper water and fired at them. The beasts then jumped in. I tucked my gun, tossed my backpack off, and dove into deeper water and swam my heart out. I swam a lot when I was a kid. I got to land on the other side and scrambled out of the pond. I instantly realized my gun was gone. It must have fallen loose. The beasts emerged from the bog right behind me. I bolted through darker, denser wetlands, dodging and ducking branches, leaping over soggy shrubs. I slipped and fell down a crevice. I slammed against a fallen tree where a decomposing enormous tree had fallen. Other fallen trees lay across it, lodged into the land and creating a hollow underneath, a tight crawl space to hide in. I quickly climbed down into the hollow. Inside, I squeezed into the small cave made of sludge, soil, and twisted roots. I went quiet AF. I heard the beasts enter the area, at least 2 of them. They slowed down. I heard their steps breaking branches as they seemed to be moving closer to the fallen trees and the hollow I was inside. I peeked out and saw one of them approaching, less than 10 feet away. Not wanting to be trapped, I quickly tumbled out of the hollow and hid behind another decomposing tree. I thought for sure that the beast saw me. I hid in a patch of ferns, but it didn't see me. I watched it look into the hollow and even crawl inside a bit. The other beast scanned the area, and I thought our eyes locked for a moment. I closed my eyes and lay still in the mud. I was covered in slimy muck and hoped that I blended into the land. I heard the beast slowly move towards me, one stealthy step, then another, barely making a sound. But I knew it was there. I kept my eyes closed and my cheek planted in the soil. The beast kept moving towards me. I then heard the other beast enter my vicinity. They seemed to be on each side of me and closing in. As they moved towards me, I thought about popping up and bolting away. But then something else struck me. Did I even care to die? I had contemplated this question since Emma crossed over. But Jet was then my reason to keep going, to take care of her. But then when she left me, I thought about just standing up and letting them rip me apart, tearing me limb from limb, or smashing my skull with a giant rock. Maybe it would be fast. Maybe it would be slow and terrible. I didn't really know if I cared. I then heard the loud crack of a branch breaking under a heavy weight and realized the beasts were right next to me. I peeked open an eye and saw a big, matted hairy foot right in front of my face. I was just about to get up and accept my fate. But then, as if she were right there over my shoulder, I swear to everything that is holy to me, that I heard Emma's voice say, "Stay." When I heard it, I froze solid as stone. Strange sounds came from the beasts. It was as if the 2 beasts were talking to each other. I heard the beasts sniffing. They made more odd noises, grunting and growling. Then one shrieked, then the other one. I tried not to move. They were both right-fing next to me. I was holding my breath, but couldn't much longer. They were going to see me. It was going to happen soon. Time stopped. I thought I was done for and would be joining Emma and Jet, and it filled me with joy. So much joy. But then the beasts ran off. I heard their footsteps fade deeper and deeper away. I was still holding my breath. A long moment went by. The wind rustled some trees, but I didn't hear anything else. I opened my eyes. I realized just how well I blended in with the land. My whole body was covered in thick muck. When I slid into this spot, the muddy dirt and plants smooshed over me. I then quickly scrambled back to the hollow and climbed in, squeezing all the way inside. It was easy because I was so slimed up. I tried to get comfortable, which didn't seem possible in the mushy peat pit. I didn't sleep, my body in a daze, my mind racing. All I could think about was, why did I live? Did Emma speak to me? Was it just my mind playing tricks? Why was I so alone and left to miss them so much? Why couldn't I have just died and joined them? When the early morning sun shined across the hollow, I peeked out. Birds were chirping. The forest looked beautiful and peaceful. I made my way out of the hollow, crouched down low, expecting the beasts, but none appeared. I knew there was a gas station I had passed that was south of my campsite. It was around 200 miles away. I used the sun to navigate south and began to walk, always anticipating that I could get attacked at any moment. It took me 6 days of sustaining on berries and creek water, and 6 nights of sleeping in creepy forest crawl spaces. I thought for sure a snake, nasty spider or bear would get me instead of Bigfoot or dehydration. Somehow, I made it to the highway and eventually the gas station. My feet were destroyed. I had blisters on top of blisters, bruises on top of bruises. I felt like some bones were broken in my foot and maybe ribs. My muscles were cramped and swollen. I was a complete mess, both physically and emotionally. I was a lost man who decided to keep living. I told 2 forest rangers my story. They gave me their full attention, as I must have been entertaining as hell. This crazy man covered in dry mud and berries, out there in no man's land to spread my family's ashes on some sentimental journey. They wrote everything down and just said, "We'll investigate and see what we find." I don't know if they believed me. I did feel like one was holding something back. The other, much older, ranger seemed to be keeping her in check. I still had my phone, but it was completely destroyed. I took it to a tech guy who was able to access its hard drive, but there were no pictures there. The ranger followed up with me a few days later, saying they found my campsite, overturned vehicle, and empty liquor bottles. They didn't find any body or even traces of blood anywhere. He insinuated that I may have been incredibly distraught and heavily intoxicated because of my loss, and perhaps drove drunk and flipped my own car over. And maybe I was a bit delusional, perhaps even concussed. I didn't argue or fight back. It did sound crazy. I didn't care if they believed me. I know what I experienced. I'm currently sitting in my terribly empty apartment right now, listening to the noise of the city outside. I needed to share this story with others, as I'm truly lost and don't know what to do next. Story 4. Red raincoat. I don't allow myself to buy a doormat for my home anymore. I lived in an apartment complex about 5 years ago, right in the heart of New York City. I was living alone at the time. My family was in Rhode Island, and with me being new to the area, I didn't have many friends to speak of. I moved into Shallow Reed with my backpack and 2 large suitcases. Boxes from home were on the way, but it couldn't be anything too big to not fit in the mail, and had to be light enough for me to not go dirt poor in fees. My family helped, but they've already done enough. I was fresh out of college and looking to be an editor. This lifestyle didn't come with the highest hope. Just an immature energy that will push your loved ones away from you, but will fulfill your personal aspirations. My apartment was small but fulfilled more than enough. The rooms were clean and the utilities worked. I was stressed but happy, excited even. The area was, well, pretty rough. I had to grow a pretty thick skin to not take it personally if someone was calling me something or trying to hassle me. Crossing the street was once stressful, but it's nothing now. The bus station was only down the street and it took me everywhere I needed to go. I didn't take my car with me, so walking and public transport was my way to go. It was about 2 years into my job at a publishing house that I had to leave. I had recently gotten a few shelves, a few wall decorations, and a welcome mat for the entrance to my apartment. It was a tufted mat with a rainbow, and under it was a white lettering of welcome. Something sweet, subtle queer pride. You know, a homey feel. The day of the incident went about as expected. I woke up for work, did what I had to do, and came home. I didn't go out to a club or a bar that night. I liked the nightlife of the city. I had a few people over every now and again, but no one really stuck around. I had a relatively defensive disposition with where I lived. There were a few times that I had to fend off solicitors. I always kept my door locked and bolted. I didn't take any risks, especially when I lived on the first floor. I was pretty pissed off that night. To be honest, the unit above me was blasting music, and the couple in the room next to me was enjoying their relationship just a bit too loudly. It was a little after 8 p.m. and I was watching something on my TV. I didn't really watch a lot of TV shows. I read what I needed from my phone and heard office gossip at work. I did watch the nightly news though. got into that habit from my parents. I had to be in the know about literary news, not so much local news. Suddenly, I heard the faintest sound of a knock. I perked up from my seat on my couch, but didn't mute the show I was watching. It could have just been anything. There was a knock again, this time sounding more firm, more confident. Immediately I stood, some panic starting to rush through me. Who would be knocking on my door at this hour? The police? Maybe a neighbor? I walked over to my door quietly, sneaking up to look through the peephole. The person was looking down at the floor and had a red jacket on with the hood obscuring their face. They looked small though, like a child. They nervously shuffled as they waited for me to respond. I cleared my throat and put on my man voice, trying to sound somewhat intimidating. They were knocking at my door after all. Hello? Who's there? The person turned to look at the door. I could see the tears running down the young girl's face. I barely even gave it a second thought as I opened the door. With her being what? No more than 9? I was concerned for her rather than myself. Hi, little one. Are you looking for someone? Is someone out with you? I can't find my mom. She sniffled and wiped her eyes. She was wearing a simple red raincoat that was soaked from the rain outside. I peeked down each end of the hall and saw no one else there. I knelt to be closer to her height. I'm not a big guy, but I towered over her. When did you last see her? She was here, but then she was gone. She continued to talk, but her words came out as a blubbering mess. It's all right. Listen, we will find her. Do you know a phone number we can call? She nodded and wiped her face once more. Come inside and we will get you dried off. I gently offered her my hand, which she took after a moment. There was no such thing as a front office to shallow read, and at this time of day, I doubted any of the landlords were here. She wiped her shoes on my doormat, and when she looked up, her eyes were wide, scanning around the apartment. Not that I felt embarrassed at the time, but my house wasn't really geared toward young children. I had a nice little cart of different alcohols and various collections strewn about that I used for decoration. I led her to the living room where the TV was. She took off her raincoat after I asked if I could leave it on the doorknob outside the apartment. Anyone who knew her would recognize it, and I doubted anyone in my building would steal a children's raincoat. I quickly rushed to my bathroom to grab her a towel. She was standing in the center of the living room, staring at the TV. I offered her the towel and grabbed my phone. Here you are. I'm Derek. Can I get your name? I'm Cho. I'm calling Mom, she said in her small voice. I offered her my phone, which she quickly snatched up, dialing the numbers. She turned her back to me as the dial tone rang. I stepped away to the kitchen to give her a moment. A small marble island separated the two rooms, which allowed me to peek over at her while I got her a cup of water. After a few moments, she spoke in a different language which I only knew enough about to know it was some Asian language. She turned to me as I handed her the water. What is this place? She asked. Shallow Reed Apartments. I'm Unit 5, first floor, I clarified. She spoke again to the person on the phone. She was quiet for a moment, looking around the room as if someone could be listening to her. She briefly made eye contact with me and flicked her gaze away. I felt a bit awkward standing there, despite knowing the fact that this little girl could do absolutely nothing to harm me. I was still a bit on edge. It was a few moments later before Cho handed me my phone back. She'll be here soon, was all she said to me, looking down at the floor. I looked at my phone, thinking if I should report this to the police or not. Yeah, her mother is on the way. But why was she missing in the first place? How come you knocked on my door and not Unit 1? Sorry, the first door in the hall. Your carpet. My carpet, I thought. What did she mean by that? There's a rainbow. No one else had a rainbow, she said simply, like it was obvious. I realized then she was talking about my doormat. Shallow Reeds wasn't exactly the most queer inclusive, but I didn't worry about someone knocking down my door for having a rainbow on my mat. I hoped to show a bit of friendliness. Didn't expect it would lead a kid to my door. I moved on and asked another question. How did you and your mom get separated? I asked her in the most peaceful tone I could. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the ground. Her eyes darted to my TV when the opening theme for the news started playing. "Can you change this, please?" she asked. I mean, it felt out of the blue that she asked me that. But then again, I don't think the news is the most popular children's show. I found the remote right where I left it on the arm of the couch and put on a kids' show starring a blue heeler family. Figured that would be better than the nightly news. She didn't really seem open to talking much anyway. Well, the quicker she's out of here, the better, I thought. It was maybe 5 minutes later that a hurried knock sounded through the apartment. I immediately stood up from where I was on the opposite end of the couch from Cho and rushed to the door. I instantly opened it up and found a woman clutching the red raincoat in her hands. Unlike Cho, she had long black hair and a slight hunch on her back. She looked younger than what I expected to be walking with a hunch. She was maybe in her 30s to 40s. Cho cried behind me, "Mama!" I quickly stepped to the side as the woman moved past me and into my home. I kept the door open, expecting them to be on their way shortly. The mother started talking to Cho in the same language I heard over the phone. She cupped her face in her hands and did a thorough look over of her child. She arrived maybe 10 minutes ago. She hasn't said much. I spoke up, but the mom didn't indicate if she heard me or not. "Would you mind if we use your restroom? She has a cut on her arm that I want to clean," said the mom. "Oh, sure. It's down the hall and to the left. First aid kit is in the closet." I pointed in the direction she had to go. My bedroom was right across from it. She led her daughter to the bathroom, looking a bit too curiously into my bedroom for my liking. They've seen the whole apartment by this point. I didn't remember seeing a scratch on the kid, but I didn't search her to begin with. While they were in the bathroom, I went to change the TV but couldn't find the remote. I found that a bit odd, seeing as I placed it in the same spot I did earlier. The great thing about today's day and age is that everything is digital, so I pulled up the TV app on my phone and changed it from there. When I changed the channel back to the news, I was met with the video of a roaring house fire that happened earlier in the day. Well, I didn't miss all of the nightly news coverage. I could hear them fiercely whispering in the bathroom, which I didn't find surprising. I'm sure the mom was giving the kid an earful, but I was under the impression that improper adult supervision was the cause and not the child. But I'm not going to intervene. And in our last update of the night, we have a local alert brought to you by the police department. We are on the lookout for a group of individuals wanted for home invasion and homicide. On the screen, they flashed a few images of men that all looked like basic figures. None of them really stood out in any remarkable way. They all wore black masks and all had thin figures. They've been breaking into homes and stealing electronics, jewelry, and anything that could be sold off easily. It was what came next that caused my stomach to churn. In their most recent attack, the homeowners had a camera system installed that captured the entire event all on film. On the TV screen, someone was standing in a bright red raincoat. The recording had audio and subtitles to go along with it. I can't find my mom. I could feel the blood draining from my face. I quickly lowered the TV volume, looking behind me to make sure no one was there. The bathroom light was still on, but the whispering had stopped. I turned back to the screen, and they had fast-forwarded the clip. The same woman in my bathroom was there on my screen. I quickly dialed 911 and turned off the TV. I kept my eyes locked on the bathroom as I rushed to the front door. When I was about to reach for the handle, a heavy knock banged against the door. I froze in place, my finger hovering over the call button. From the bathroom, I heard the lady call, "That should be my brother. He's our ride home. Can you tell him we will be right out?" "Sure thing. Let me just turn off the oven," I responded. Panic coursed through me. I slowly locked the door. I even grabbed some mail to make an impromptu doorstop. As I shoved it underneath the door, the person knocked again. I jumped back and tiptoed to my bedroom. They pounded the door again. I held my breath as I passed the bathroom. Neither the girl nor the woman made a sound. I locked my door behind me and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My house is being broken into. It's the people from... I was interrupted by a sudden slamming. They were breaking down the front door. They made it into my home, I whispered. I stepped away from my door. "Sir, what is your location?" There were shouts from the men who busted the door down. They were smashing my stuff and God knows what else. I knew my door wouldn't hold long enough for the police to get here. I had to do something now. Without a second thought, I ran to the one window in my room. I heard the woman cry. My doorknob twisted as she did. She was crying for help. She yelled that they would kill her if I didn't help. They would kill her child. I opened the window and pushed the screen out of the frame. The walls shook as someone started to pound my bedroom door. I stepped out of the frame, only to have a hand grab tightly onto my shirt collar. Someone was standing outside waiting. I dropped my phone as I was pushed to the ground. I could hear the 911 operator yelling through the phone as it dropped, breaking against the small rocks that lined my building. There were hands around my throat before I could even react. The person on top of me dropped all his weight onto my hips, straddling me and keeping me pinned. I struggled in his grip. I didn't even have time to panic. All I could do was react. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, the utter disregard for humanity. I can still see the smile stretched across his lips. I could see myself reflected in the black of his eyes. I tried to knock away his arms, trying to scratch at his face. My head was pounding, and my vision getting darker and darker. I couldn't hear him, but I could see him bending closer to my face. Spit hit my cheeks as he laughed just inches from me. I grabbed the ground under me and used the last of my strength to aim for those dark pools. The blood hit my cheek before his laughter turned into screaming. Air rushed into my lungs as the man clutched his eye, or what would be left of it. I could only wiggle away from him as he dislodged the small rock from his eye socket. He pulled out more than the rock. I finally picked myself up and left the man behind me. I ran. I ran as fast as I possibly could and didn't look back. I ran across the street and started yelling at the top of my lungs for help. There were a few businesses, one of which was a pizza joint that still had its lights on. I ran to their door and yanked it open. I quickly found the lock for the glass door and turned it. The employees immediately started yelling at me, getting ready to defend themselves, I'm sure. I turned to face them, and they stopped trying to shoo me away after they saw the dark red handprints around my neck. Everything was a blur of movement from that point on. The pizza place ended up calling the cops, which is where I was able to give them more information. The cop cars took a few minutes to arrive, long enough for me to know that if I didn't go out my window. By the time they arrived, there wasn't anyone left in my apartment. Even with the officers by my side, I was worried about going in. They had a team come in to try and get samples of anything you could think of. They swabbed the man's blood that got on me and took photos of everything. My apartment was an utter disaster. Whatever they couldn't take, they smashed. The police took me down to the station in order for me to write up a formal report. I told them about Cho and the woman who came to my door. Hours later, they gave me an update. They found a man fitting the description I gave them. He was missing his eye and was dumped in a garbage bin 20 minutes from where I lived. Even after I spent a week in a hotel and another week at a co-worker's place, there was no sign of the people who attacked me. The cops weren't any help either, without anything to go off of. All they could do was wait. I asked the cops why they came after me, and they responded by asking me if I owned any firearms, which they would have known the answer to already, but I told them I didn't. They told me how the other homes they had been suspected of breaking into all had something in common. The first family they attacked worked closely with a local church. Another home was just an apartment of college students. And the last home, the one that got footage of the woman from their security cameras, was a family who didn't have their citizenship in the States yet. It didn't take much to connect the dots that none of these people would have owned any guns or would have turned away a young child. We were all targeted as an easy mark. The police said they couldn't know how much the group knew about us until they were able to catch the culprits, but they knew enough about me. I've since moved and taken some self-defense courses, and even bought myself a handgun that I touch once a year to bring to the range. I jump every time I hear a knock at the door, but I'll be ready for when they come to visit me again. At least that's how I felt before I came home today. And on my doorknob, there was a red raincoat. Story 5. I'm trapped in my neighbor's basement. I pray for him to never find out. This year has been, though, for me and my family. Not only have we moved from one country to another, but in the span of 3 years we have had to go through 4 moves. The first one in search of a better life. The second due to lack of money. The third to get closer to my mother's family. And the last because the tenant sold the house with us still living in it. And now you may wonder, why the hell am I telling you this? What does it have to do with the title of the story? Did I eat a clickbait? I beg you, reader, please read my story until the end. As bad as it sounds, men like my neighbor are everywhere, and it is more than necessary not to ignore situations like this. The moving is just a bit of context to introduce you to my mental health problems. I won't give you too many details, but so many movings and changes have taken their toll on my head. I went through a very thorough patch, suffering from suicidal thoughts and anxiety attacks. Several times this has culminated in me running away from home, and once they even called the police. My parents' fear that something would happen to me forced them not only to obviously seek professional help, but also to be with me at all times. I never slept alone, was never home alone, always had the bathroom door ajar, and under no circumstances could I ever go outside without their supervision. It's not that I had that many friends back then, so this past measure never bothered me much. Months passed, and my mental health, therefore my physical health as well, improved infinitely. Little by little, the supervision over me was lowering, and my social skills were curiously flourishing. Everything was going incredibly great, too good to be true. I wish I wasn't right. A couple of weeks ago, a couple of policemen knocked on my door to talk to my mother, and no, it wasn't for me this time. They were looking for a guy who supposedly lived in our neighborhood. I never saw the picture, but according to my mom's description, he was a sleazy, bald, old guy with a perverted, demonic look. Needless to say, we were scared to death. One thing that is important to keep in mind is that I am not an only child. In fact, I have many siblings, of which only 3 live with me, all sisters. My mother had a talk with us about being extra careful. She also increased supervision over me. Again, the police hanged around for a couple of days, shutting the operation when no evidence was found. They'll never know the pain I would have saved if they have looked for a little longer. Weeks went by, and little by little we forgot about it, and everything went back to normal, as if those policemen had never knocked on our door, and nor my mother had never seen that picture. The paranoia of feeling that man's eyes every moment was dissipating as the time went by. Only when fooling around with my friends I was reminded of that episode. I thought we were completely safe. Safe until exactly 1 year from now. Like almost every day, I went to do my exercise routine in the pool, unaware that my life would make a 180 loop in just a few hours. I swam a bit here and there. Some older gentlemen, probably English, approached to the pool, and I knew it was time to go. It was cold anyway, and I don't, being surrounded by strange men on my own. I dried my hair, put on a towel and headed home. It wasn't very far away from the public pool, just a 5-minute walk. If it wasn't for the lady who asked me for help on the way, I could have maybe make it in 2. She was probably in her late 50s, slim figure, grey hair and dark circles around her eyes. You could tell the poor woman was very tired, almost dead in life. With a surprisingly sweet voice, she asked me if I could help her with the supermarket bags. I couldn't refuse. To thank me for my job, she invited me over to her house for tea. I don't know if it was out of pity or politeness, but I ended up accepted to have tea with her. I can't recall why, though. It is not something I do often, and oh my God, how much I regret it. She offered me cookies and tea before we started chatting. She was not only kind, but incredibly smart. She had studied plastic surgery at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. She had been married for 35 years and was mother 3 wonderful children, the youngest being my age. When I started to get dark, I politely said goodbye. She got up and approached to me. Suddenly, with her thin arms, she hugged me tightly, very tightly, too tightly. In a few seconds, everything went pitch black around me. From that moment, everything is confusing and blurry. I had no clue of what happened or how much time had passed. I was disoriented, thirsty and hungry. There was no light. All silent, and humidity was unbearable. I really couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. It would have been an hour or two before I heard a noise. I don't really know. I lost track of time as soon as I opened my eyes. Footsteps on the wood could be heard, slowly and cautiously getting closer and closer. The door opened. A black silhouette could be seen moving towards my... It was her. Definitely her. More tired and skinnier than I remember, but her with no doubt. I bet she had been crying. I tried to stand up, but my legs and arms were entirely numb. I swear that I could move them just a few moments ago. The woman came up to me with her bony figure and tires stand. I've just realized that, despite knowing so much about her life, I didn't know something so basic as her name. Pretty sure everything she told me was a lie. She walked towards me, trembling and cautiously, like when you're walking by a stray dog. I might have bitten her if I had the chance, though. He knelt down, a few feet from me, of course. It took me off guard, but when she saw my face, she started crying uncontrollably. "Where am I?" I exclaimed, more scared than I was before. "What's going on? Who are you? What am I doing here? Please don't hurt me. Think of your son." She ignored me and started crying even harder, if it was even possible, her body trembling with each sob. "Don't dare to come out," I heard her say, still sobbing. "Please don't ask for help. Don't make any noise, I beg you, or he will kill us both." I wasn't understanding anything. I asked and implored, but she only wailed. Her fear was contagious, and I began crying too. I knew that whatever the situation was, it was serious and bad, really bad. I tried to keep these thoughts away, but something told me I would no longer see my parents nor my siblings. I would no longer see my friends. I would no longer be anyone. My life was over. Everything was over. All I had left was to mourn for what I would have been if that crying lady never brought me here. We stayed like that, crying in silence for a while. Suddenly her murmurs, almost imperceptible, ceased. She stared at me for seconds that seemed like hours. "Stay silent, and maybe we'll make it alive." She got up as if nothing had happened and left. I was left into pure darkness. I didn't know it at the time, but it would be the last time I would see light. I don't know how I didn't go crazy. Maybe it was the routine or something in that woman's words that gave me hope. She said I could live. I hoped that she wasn't lying. Now I could only obey her. My days were filled with plans and fantasies of escaping. Thankfully, I now could move my hands, but still not my feet. Every time I fell asleep, a tray of what I think was food would appear in my lap. I never knew what I ate or drank. Curiosity and hunger always overcame caution. I never ate enough. The plates were small, and I never got used to the pain of visceral hunger nor the cold food. It always seemed off to me that I never smelled bad. With that dampness and lack of cleanliness, I should have been completely rotten by then. I tried not thinking much about it though. Having a stranger washing me every day is not a very pleasant thing to imagine. Since the day when we burst into tears, I swore to myself that I would escape, no matter what. Someday I would know the truth, and someday, perhaps not too far away, I would see my family and the light of day once again. However, I keep wondering who is that man the lady mentioned before, the one who wants to harm us, whose voice I might hear every day without fail. I don't think he knows about me yet. I even think that woman is protecting me, hiding me. She seemed frightened to death when I last saw her. I must escape, quickly. Something's telling me that the worst fate I can face is him finding out about my existence. When I said I wasn't going insane, I was lying, and lying hard. You don't notice it at first, but the levels of sanity you lose in the dark ascend exponentially. When I was a little girl, just 7 or 8 years old, I was enormously terrified of the dark. It's ironic how I would spend my evenings telling horror stories with my classmates so that then I couldn't sleep at night. The difference between now and then is that, at home, I could call my parents and cry for help. Not here. If I dare to make the slightest noise, my fears are likely to be overtaken by reality. I could do nothing but to think. I remember asking my parents, after I ran away from home, if they would still look for me if I went missing again, if the police would look for me if I disappeared. I guess that, at that moment, my poor mother's heart had to be completely shattered. My father's eyes, from whom I've never seen a tear, should had to be flooded. My siblings would be another story. They should have probably thought it was all a show to get my parents' attention. It's very likely that, as time went on, their worryings finally ended up overcoming those thoughts. Despite doing nothing, I felt weaker and weaker every day. The mystery woman wasn't coming as often as before. I was starting to smell awfully, felt like a rottening potato, and, despite not being able to reckon the hours, the then almost never missing trays of food weren't appearing as before, and hunger was starting to get the best of me. On behalf of that, there were almost no changes in my routine. When she gave me more food than usual, I came to know a fasting period was coming ahead. Tried to ration the food as best as I could. Needless to say, is hard if you can't see the food by itself. You may also be wondering by now, if I couldn't see, how the heck was I able to drink? I should spill everything if I wasn't able to see the glass. And I did. I even started to think I would die of thirst, going as far as licking the fallen drops from the floor out of desperation. Anyways, they say time and practice get you used to even the worsts of lurks. Wrong, almost everything. I never got used to the lack of light, the voices and things I thought I heard and saw deep in my madness, and what I wish were dreams. At all costs I avoided sleeping, although I never wasn't really sure whether I was sleeping or not. In what I thought were my dreams, tall and thin figures, obese and disgusting beings, inhuman silhouettes approached to me with the sole mission to have fun with my misery. No matter how hard I tried to move or run away, my legs did not respond. Impotence was eating me from my insides, day and night, never left alone. It was horrible. It came the moment when I had no tears left to cry, and the only thing that helped me cope with my fears was inflicting pain in my body to stay awake. That was my life, every day, every hour and every fucking minute, until one day something changed. I woke up and, instead of the now familiar tray, I found myself holding a sheet of paper, a damn sheet of paper with something printed on it. It was a photo. My photo I couldn't see. I don't know why, but I couldn't contain my laughter anymore. A laughter of pity came from that cruel joke, a joke that was on me, a joke I couldn't see. By then, I didn't care if the devil himself would came to shut me down on that very moment. I was already dead and I just needed to laugh. I wanted to laugh at myself, at my stupidity and my luck, for being the victim of a joke due gas black as the room I was locked in. I laughed so hard that my whole body ached. I was so thin that my body could have cracked from laughing. It hurt, but it was liberating. It was either that or crying. You should know you need less muscles for laughing. I was so immersed in laughing, I didn't notice that the door was opening. Someone's eyes staring at me. My heart missed a heartbeat, maybe 2 heartbeats. It took me a while to realize that it was her, the mysterious and crazy woman. Not being used to the light, my eyes hurt, making it even harder to see. I thought it was impossible, but she was even thinner than the last time I saw her. I thought she shrunk a couple of inches too. Maybe my eyes were deceiving me, but her hair was totally white, as white as it can be. She sat next to me, looked at my face for a while like looking for someone, and started talking, carefully pronouncing every single word with a very sweet voice. I know you probably don't want to talk to me right now. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, trying to hold back what I thought were tears. You might also have many doubts, which I would like to answer, but I feel like now is not the right moment, plus I don't feel capable to. She coughed a little before continuing. She was really making an effort to talk. Whose picture you're holding in your hands was my son's, Tom. He took it when he was 15 years old or so. Your age, I think. I completely forgot about the photo. Finally, being able to see some light in those circumstances was so miraculous by itself that was having all my attention. When looked at the picture, I immediately noticed his messy black hair, his really nice features, and his beautiful blue eyes. His mother's eyes. My husband was a monster, she continued. I didn't realize that when I first met him. He was so sweet and kind that I didn't hesitate for a second to run elope with him when he asked me to. I was head over heels for him, and I thought he loved me too. When I had my first child, his true nature came out. My baby was the only reason why I kept taking all that abuse. I tried to protect him. I really did. But when a child became 3, I had no energy left to keep going on, to endure the pain. The time came when I stopped disguising my wounds and hiding the pain. She stopped talking for a moment, trying to decide whether to say what she was going to say, and if yes, how to say them. She stuttered a little before being able to formulate the next sentences. When Thomas was born, all the abuse redirected towards him. My husband made it his main and only goal in life to cause him pain in order to fulfill every and all of his twisted fantasies. I was so relieved that I wasn't taking all his shit. I ignored his screams, somehow let it happen. She closed her eyes, sighed, and began to cry. The day came when he killed him, she said, raising his voice with every word. The fucking son of a bitch killed my baby, his own son, beating him to death. And then the damn coward killed himself too, and I consented to it, because I once loved him, because I once loved my children, because I loved myself, and I regretted every single second of every single day. I regret ignoring him, letting him die. My baby, I can no longer sleep, I can no longer eat. My children no longer want anything to do with me. You don't know the pain a mother feels when she loses a child. That day that I lost them all, and I know that the day will come. The day will come when we finally meet in hell, and I'll make sure he finally pays for everything he's done. Then she screamed, hid her face with her hands, and sobbed for a while. We were like that until she suddenly went silent, wiped the tears of her face, raised it and looked me straight in the eye, filled with determination. It won't be long, I heard her say. I promise. Just hold on for a little longer. We'll both get out of here. Trust me, but I need you to be quiet. Really quiet for a while. I'll get you out of here, and someday you'll know truth. But please, you need to trust me first. How could I? I was confused, very confused. Did that woman intended to turn me into Thomas or something? Was she delusional? Was that why she had kidnapped me? It was so crazy, but I honestly would be surprised if it was the so-named truth. She looked so haggard, so pitiful. No matter how hard I tried, something in me couldn't hate her, even though, for starters, she was the one who took away my freedom and locked me in that place. Not that I felt sympathy for her, but I had the feeling that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I felt like, without it, I was in no position to judge yet. When the door closed, I was again submitted back into darkness, that familiar but still strange darkness. Now, I deeply wanted to believe, once again, in the hope of one day being finally free. For the last time in my life, I was a child again, just an innocent child who believed in fairy tales once more. Story 6. I visited a cult who kept their leader's body wrapped in Christmas lights and covered in glitter. I barely escaped with my life. The first time I saw Mother God, she lay in a blue sleeping bag, her face covered in glitter, her eyes missing. Someone had wrapped Christmas lights around her desiccated corpse, and now they strobed and twinkled merrily. Mother God is in stasis, a calm voice said from behind me. I turned. Seeing Hope had followed me into the room. She was one of Mother God's most fanatical followers. She is taking all the poisons from the universe into her body. Soon, she will wake up and lead us towards ascension. You must hug Mother God, a deep male voice demanded. Through the shadows of the hallway, I saw Lama, a hulking mass of red hair and muscle. He held a pistol in one steady hand. She will take away your doubts and anxieties. I'm not hugging a goddamn corpse. I spat angrily, wondering how I kept getting into these bizarre situations. How come you guys didn't call a doctor when she was dying? What the hell is wrong with you people? Mother God is not dead, Llama screamed in an insane voice. How could God possibly die? And why would we call a three-dimensional doctor? Anyway, Mother God is a five-dimensional being. They wouldn't even know where to start. Hope said, her eyes wide and gleaming. Llama nodded in fanatical agreement. I wondered where the rest of them were. I looked around, trying to find a way out. I knew they had my 2-year-old son downstairs, playing with the other kids who lived at the compound. If you don't hug Mother God, you will be recycled into the galactic center, Llama said, pointing the pistol in the middle of my forehead. He wore some strange combination of a shawl and a poncho, the once colorful material now dull and fraying. I could smell the sage and weed permeating his clothes. Llama looked at me with eyes the faded green color of swamp water. His long beard looked far greasier than the last time I had seen him, his skin sunken and gray. I turned, staring down at the mummified corpse. The papery flesh hung tightly to the grinning skull. The lips had been eaten away, showing yellowed, cracked teeth. The nose, too, had collapsed into the center of the face. 2 ragged sinus holes covered in dried yellowish pus and clotted blood marked the spot. The smell emanating from Mother God's desiccated body was sickening, a combination of cinnamon, feces and rotting meat. Do it, Llama demanded, shoving the barrel of the pistol into the small of my back. A sharp stabbing pain shot up my spine as I stumbled forward. Do it, Hope repeated in her droning, emotionless voice. I looked down at the corpse sprawled across the floor, inhaling deeply. I held my breath and lowered myself down on my knees. Mother God's grinning, half-decayed skull almost looked like it was trying not to laugh. I held my breath so as to avoid inhaling the rank odors rising from the decomposing body. Hesitantly, I leaned forward, extending my trembling hands towards Mother God. I wrapped my arms around the sleeping bag, hugging the corpse gently. I wanted to avoid releasing any more gas bubbles, as the entire room already smelled of infection and shit. Mother God's thin arms cracked like dry chicken bones. Black fluid dribbled from her mouth, reeking of sewerage and bacteria. I closed my eyes, trying not to vomit. Isn't it beautiful? Hope asked as I pushed myself up, wavering on my feet and trying not to puke. She stroked her long brown hair over and over, as if trying to calm herself down. Can't you feel all the love radiating off of her? She is the center of everything, the storehouse of compassion. I nodded, continuously swallowing all the saliva flooding my mouth to try to keep from retching in front of these insane fanatics. The smell of feces and rot seemed to have grown stronger in the room. I remembered the children on the floor below us and felt a rising sense of horror as I realized they had been living in this house with a corpse for weeks. I need to go check on Davy, I whispered, feeling my heart racing. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare. Llama stood like a statue, the pistol pointed down by his side. His eyes were half closed, as if he were in some sort of stupor. Hope crept up behind him, putting her long fingers on his shoulder. Llama's eyes flew open as if he had just woken up. Davy is fine, he said in a robotic monotone. Everything is fine. We are one. We are one, Hope repeated excitedly. All one. Okay, I whispered slowly, looking between the two of them. I'm going downstairs then. I took a step toward the door. A moment later, I heard the floorboards creaking. I glanced back, seeing Hope and Llama following closely behind me, whispering to each other in low, conspiratorial voices. Even in the sprawling living room downstairs, the cloying smell of dead flesh followed us. I saw Davy sleeping on a beanbag next to a little girl, looking as peaceful as a tiny angel. Did you guys see Mother God? Another girl named Aurora asked. She was laying on the couch next to a smoking glass bong. She is still in stasis, Hope answered grimly, her eyes sad and downcast. She has not yet awoken to lead us into ascension. Aurora sat up, flicking a lighter and filling up the bong with thick, Grey smoke. The skunky smell did nothing to cover up the reek of decaying meat. However, it seemed to combine with it into something even more nauseating and sickening than before. I had not come here for no reason, though I now regretted bringing Davy. My brother, Lee, had been missing for nearly a month. The last time I heard from him, he told me about making new friends in this laid-back compound where everyone ate mushrooms and talked about spirituality all the time. Then his phone shut off, and he seemed to just disappear. I wasn't too worried, to be honest, as Lee was a full-grown man and could take care of himself. But after 5 weeks, my mother and father begged me to try to find him and make sure he was okay. Now that I was here, I wasn't confident that he was. I wondered how to bring up the subject to these nut jobs. Hey, you guys aren't holding prisoners in the basement like some kind of Gary Heidnik horror house, are you? I'm sorry. I'm being rude, Aurora said, turning her dark eyes to me. Like Hope, her face was caked in far too much makeup and had a somewhat blocky, unattractive quality. Her nose was just slightly too big, her forehead too high, her cheekbones too bony, other than Aurora's hair, which was dyed pink and black. She might have been twins with Hope. She raised the bong to me. You said you're friends with Lee, right? Do you want a hit? I waved my hand in front of my chest. No, I'm good, I said. Actually, Lee's my brother. He dropped off the map a few weeks ago, and my parents just wanted to make sure he wasn't dead in a ditch somewhere. I didn't realize it at that moment, but things were about to get a lot stranger than they already were in the compound. I heard a shrill keening, rising in volume. It sounded like the cries of a panicked, injured animal. It drew closer. My head ratcheted over to stare at the basement door, which flew open. A naked woman with frayed strands of thick rope still tied to her wrists exploded through the threshold. She looked scarecrow thin, and her pale, white flesh covered in deep purple bruises and angry red gashes. "Help me," she cried, staring directly at me. The rest of the room went deathly silent. I heard the crying of Davy and the other children as they woke up, surprised by the sudden screaming and slamming. "What are you doing out of the learning room?" Lama asked in a voice seething with psychopathic coldness. She screamed and tried pushing past Lama and Hope, heading toward the door. Hope fell backwards, her eyes wide and surprised as she smacked her head hard on the dirty carpet. Lama was much faster. However, he reached for his holstered pistol. It came out in a black blur. He fired only once, hitting the woman in the center of the forehead. A small, perfectly round entrance wound appeared like magic. Her head jerked back, her hands clenching into fists. Her naked, battered body fell backwards as if in slow motion. She lay there, bleeding and twitching on the floor, her fingernails and lips turning blue. I heard a lighter flick and saw Aurora nonchalantly filling up the massive 4-foot-tall glass bong. Davy's small body stumbled across the room toward me, tears and snot streaming from his tiny, pinched face. I ran toward him, picking him up and hugging him. I felt the warmth radiating off of him as his arms closed around my neck. Turning, I decided I needed to leave immediately. I started heading toward the door without a word, but Lama stepped in front of it, his emerald eyes flashing with excitement and pleasure. "And just where the fuck do you think you're going?" he asked, a Cheshire cat grin splitting his bearded face. He ran his fingers through his fire-red hair, looking as calm and collected as a Buddha. "Don't you want to see your brother?" No. I think I'm good," I stuttered nervously. Lama put the hand with the pistol in it around my neck, leaning on me like an old friend. "He's here, you know," he whispered in a conspiratorial voice. "He wants to see you, too." "We can't let you leave until you see Lee," Hope said from behind me. She had crept up on me, and her voice was only inches away. I saw her holding a long, serrated knife covered with dark crimson stains by her side. The handle looked sticky with gore. "Why did you kill that girl?" I whispered, feeling Davy's rapid heartbeat beating through his shirt. I cradled my son in my arms protectively, but I was surrounded on all sides. The only exit blocked. Lama shook his head. Looking like a disappointed parent, she tried to escape and tell others about us. He said, "The world is not ready for us yet. Mother God has not awoken. We try to be compassionate here. If anyone tries to escape, they go to the learning room, where they can be taught anew." She was worthless anyway. Hope spat with hatred, prodding the still corpse of the naked woman with one shoe, always complaining about how much she missed her family. "This is our family now, the intergalactic family of love." Her eyes shone with fanaticism. "Do you want to see the learning room?" Lama asked coldly. "Is Lee down there?" I said. Lama shrugged. "Why don't we go see for ourselves?" he asked in response, jamming the barrel of the pistol into my stomach. Davy's crying had quieted to a soft whimpering, carrying my son in my hands. I turned and walked across the room towards the stairs to the basement. The steps looked dank and wet, flat slabs of concrete descending into a dark pit. Lama followed close behind me as our steps echoed off the grey walls. I was surprised at just how deep this building went. We went down at least a couple stories in the claustrophobic concrete tunnel. At the bottom, I beheld a nightmarish scene. A single flickering incandescent bulb overhead cast the dungeon in a dim light. A naked man was tied in the center of the room, his arms held straight up above his bowed head with knots of thick, brown rope. Deep, infected slashes ran across his back, the wounds suppurating and spreading in black patches. His entire body appeared like a road map of torture marks, bruises and clotted pus. All around the concrete walls of the room, someone had glued thousands of dismembered eyeballs. Most of them looked like they came from animals, but not all. Many were no more than rotting drippings of vitreous fluid and gore, yet others looked fresh. The smell of septic shock and decomposition hung thick and rank in the air, and I realized that not all the fetid odors in the house had come from the corpse of Mother God. From a dark corner, a silhouette stepped forward. I saw the form of my brother, his dark eyes blazing. He looked totally unharmed. He gave me a crooked half smile. "Lee! Holy shit! You're okay," I said. Surprised, he nodded patiently. "Father God is in charge of the learning room," Lama said. I looked between him and Lee, confused. Then the realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. "You're not being held prisoner here?" I asked, a rising sense of horror gripping my heart with a suffocating strength. Lama laughed at that, a sardonic, low chuckle of mirth and sadism that echoed through the room. The torture victim stirred, raising his bloody head slowly. I saw one of his eyes had swollen shut. Blood dribbled from a purple lump the size of an orange. His other eye opened, looking watery and unfocused. "Help me," he whispered in a voice choked with pain. Lee stepped forward. In a flash, he struck out at the bound man, bringing a fist up into his jaw. I heard a crack of bone as a tooth flew out of his bloody, swollen mouth. "Stop it. What the hell are you doing?" I asked, still holding Davy in my arms. Davy hid his face into my chest, not looking at the torture and dismemberment surrounding us on all sides like a tomb. "He tried to sell us out to the men in black," Lee said, pointing an accusing finger at the naked man as he spat blood on the cold concrete floor. "We caught him talking to them." "What the hell are men in black?" I asked. Lee looked hard at me. "We don't really know. They keep showing up here in flashy, colorful cars. They always wear sunglasses to cover their bulging eyes. Sometimes they have extra fingers, and they're always long and twisted. They say they're from the US government, but they don't look like government agents to me. They wear garish ties and colorful hats that no CIA agent would be walking around in," Lee said grimly. "Since Mother God went into stasis, I've been leading the group. Before she fell asleep, we were interconnected souls. We think the men in black are sent from the Illuminati," Lama said from behind me. The naked man just shook his head, fresh streams of scarlet dribbling down his chin. "I never talked," the man whispered. "Father God caught you red-handed," Lama screamed in fury. Lee looked like he would strike the man again. his dark eyes narrowing to slits. But at that moment, hope ran down the cold. Concrete steps, waving her hands with manic energy. They're back. They're at the front door, and they want to see you, Hope cried, looking at Lee for guidance. Lee's face went pale, his eyes widening. The three of them ran upstairs, leaving me alone with the naked man in the room full of rotting eyeballs. "Arm yourselves!" I heard Lee scream overhead, the words echoing down the cold steps. I glanced back at the naked man, who was hanging unconscious again, the weight of his body dragging painfully against his arms. The sound of shooting reverberated from upstairs in a deafening series of bangs. Someone started screaming in pain. "They're coming in!" I heard Lee yell, his voice tinged with a kind of fear I had never heard there before. I ran upstairs, taking the cement steps two at a time, eager to get out of the learning room and out of this house of such madness. I slammed through the door, sending it smacking against the wall with a clatter. The smell of blood and gun smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the omnipresent odor of death that permeated the house. Aurora was laying sprawled in front of the threshold, half of her face blown away and charred to a smoking heap of burnt flesh. It didn't look like the work of any bullet. A spreading puddle of blood wreathed her head like a halo. Lama lay in the corner, half of his chest blackened and exposed. His face was a mask of sweat. His clothes had melted to his skin. With wide, unbelieving eyes, he gurgled, rasping and suffocating. The smell of cooked human flesh and burnt hair hung thick in the air. I thought I could see his heart beating through the blackened gore of his torso. The rest of the cultists lay dead or dying. I saw the children gathered together in a corner, hugging each other, their faces pale, their cries mixed with the gurgling of the dying. The front door stood wide open, letting the bright light stream in from the dirt parking lot. Silhouetted in the center of this effulgence stood the silhouette of a tall man in a suit. I felt like I couldn't focus on him, as if the lights grew brighter if I tried to look in that direction. He stopped into the room, causing his features to come into focus. It seemed the spell had broken as quickly as it had started. Two more men in black suits followed him a moment later. At first glance, they seemed normal enough, from a distance, anyways. And yet, my horror grew as I stared closely at the newcomers. Their faces looked as smooth and perfect as a glass pane. They each had a pair of expensive, black sunglasses. All of the hair on their bodies appeared to be missing. Even their eyebrows, they all wore brightly colored. Garish ties and undershirts that didn't match their black suits at all. They had no lips. Instead, they looked like they had drawn a crude facsimile of them with blood-red lipstick. Their fingers were long and twisted, looking as if they had far too many joints, each tapered into points. I realized with increasing unease that they had no fingernails, no lines on their palms. Like their faces, their hands almost looked as if they were made of white marble, free from all lines and imperfections, gleaming with an inhuman smoothness. The man in the front removed his sunglasses. I saw his eyes were alien, monstrous things. They bulged from their sockets, the membranes looking as tight as a snare drum and ready to burst. Long, slitted black pupils ringed by irises, the sickly yellow of a suppurating wound stared out at me. "Are you with these humans?" he hissed in a low voice that seemed to split and distort. "Are you a follower of the one they call Mother God?" "No, we're innocent," I pleaded. "I have no idea what's going on here." Davy wailed in my arms, his small face pinched with terror. The man in black put a long, gnarled finger on Davy's forehead. The boy instantly went silent, his eyes suddenly taking on a faraway, glazed look. "That is certainly fortuitous," their leader gurgled, "for Mother God was a thief, stealing our secrets. Thankfully, most humans will regard her as insane and rambling, but we can never be too careful. Can we? Not with secrets." The S sound of the last word dragged on until it exploded into a reptilian hissing. I realized all three of the men in black had their smooth, marble-white jaws hanging open, Serpentine tongues flicked out as they hissed in unison. I backpedaled away in terror, seeing the back door of the cabin standing open. The corpses of the cultists littered the floor all around me, puddles of blood spreading under their slowly cooling bodies. In the corner, Lama still twitched, his bloody face a mask of confusion and agony. "I'm not involved in this," I said to the leader, hugging my son tightly. "I didn't shoot at you guys when you came in. I just came here to check on someone, but he's dead now. So, you are involved," the leader said. "You've seen too much." He had his small, toy-like ray gun by his side. It looked like it was made out of some gleaming, silvery material that constantly shone with an inner light. "Put the child down in the corner with the others," he demanded. I just shook my head. "We will not harm the children. These are too young to speak or understand anyway." The two men in black behind the leader stepped forward, raising their small, toy-like guns at me. I trembled inwardly. The leader came forward, looking as if he would rip Davy right out of my arms. But at that moment, chaos broke out. I saw a blur of sudden movement from the corner. Lama's dying. Glazed eyes glittered with an ineffable surge of joy and fanaticism. Crawling forward towards the men in black, I saw he had a pistol in one trembling hand. I tried not to look, staring into the leader's reptilian eyes instead. Okay, I said slowly, pretending to put Davy down. At that moment, a series of gunshots rang out, deafening in the enclosed room. The men in black all spun towards Lama, seeing his mutilated, bleeding form only 9 or 10 feet away. Lama's bullets hit the leader in the neck, causing a waterfall of blood to surge down the leader's garish clothing. But it wasn't any sort of blood I had ever seen before. It was as pale and white as the men in black's skin, filled with what looked like tiny pieces of opalescent glitter. The other two instantly responded by firing their alien pistols back at Lama, sending orbs of cyclonic fire ripping through the air with the smell of ozone and smoke. I took the opportunity to flee towards the back door. The sounds of the gunshots and the eerie keening of the fireballs followed me all the way to my car. Parked next to me was the car the men in black had come in, a garish, bright orange VW Bug with federal plates on it. I flung open the door to my car, quickly put Davy in the passenger seat and rummaged in the glove box for my knife. I heard it click open. The house had gone silent by now. Knowing I was out of time, I ran toward the VW Bug, stabbing at the two tires on the driver's side. I heard the hissing of air as they quickly started deflating. I hopped in my car, hearing the door slam open behind me. Two of the men in black ran out, shooting balls of fire at my car. I heard one ping loudly against the truck, sending the car fishtailing wildly. Davy screamed in terror, certainly traumatized by this horrid experience. After nearly crashing, I managed to right the car, putting the accelerator down as far as it would go. I fled that place of nightmares, seeing balls of fire smashing the trees all around me as I went. Story 7. My girlfriend worked in the Paris catacombs. There was nothing special about the cafe. Tiny yellow espresso mugs with smiley faces on them, delicious French onion soup and worse than mediocre bread to dip, an overhang outside with rusty tables and wobbly chairs, a perfect place to watch passers-by suffering through one of the several brief downpours that seem to afflict Paris at random intervals during every April afternoon. No, nothing special at all about the cafe. Nothing except her, Hélène. Her arms were speckled in tattoos that her face looked entirely too wholesome for. Her eyes, green, almost the same circumference as the espresso mug she sipped slowly from as she sat, cross-legged, on the wobbly chair outside. But she didn't watch the people, and they weren't caught in a downpour. She just sat, immersed in a novel, McEwan's latest, and looked beautiful. I don't like to bother beautiful women in public, but this time, I simply had to. I haven't read him in a while, I say, stepping out of the cafe, holding an Americano in a to-go cup. I am American, after all, and though I'd been in Europe for a while, I'd never understood the appeal of paying my hard-inherited money for a mere tablespoon of ultra coffee. Is that one any good? Helene glanced up skeptically, a bit annoyed, as if she'd already been approached by 5 other men walking out of that very cafe. But she must have liked what she saw, because her gaze softened and she said, "He's brilliant." "Would you think me uncultured if I told you I liked Atonement better as a film?" I asked, pulling out the seat across from her. Well, that was all it took. We were off to the races, Helene and I. We talked about everything from The Cement Garden, his creepy, incestuous debut novel, to Nutshell, the wife kills husband drama told from the perspective of the unborn child inside her. And of course, she told me I was wrong, dead wrong, about Atonement. Say what you will about McEwan, but you'll always have something to say. Eventually, casually, I asked her where she worked. "You might think it's weird," she said, her accent light and airy. "Weirder than Nutshell?" I laughed. "That's fair." She sighed, then leaned forward. "I work down in the catacombs. I guide tours, keep things clean, hang out with all my friends down there." She said this last with a faux spooky waggle of her fingers. I raised my eyebrows in feigned surprise. "The catacombs? Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that." But in truth, I wouldn't have had to guess, because I already knew. It was the whole reason I approached Helene that day. Like I said, I simply had to talk to her. I should back up. It might come as a surprise, given my affection for Brit Lit and my apartment near the Place de la Bastille, but I was born and bred in West Virginia. West Virginia. In fact, the part of the state all the other West Virginians spit at through their remaining teeth. I didn't like much about the place, as you can surely tell, but I did like Abaddon Acres, the family home. Abaddon Acres began humbly, but it didn't end up that way. Generation after generation of my forebears added their own unique flair. Spare rooms, additions, annexes piled on and on until the place resembled nothing so much as a sprawling spiderweb. And over time, we Abaddons grew rich, very rich. Abaddon men were buried in a massive mausoleum out back. The women were buried out in the woods. It was the mausoleum that all my pals from school found so fascinating and disturbing when they came to visit the acres. As for me, I didn't find it either. It was just another part of home. Going inside was strictly forbidden to all except the Abaddon family patriarch, my father. Naturally, I did steal the keys and snoop around in there a few times, eventually deciding that the thrill wasn't worth the risk. It truly was nothing but dusty old tombs. And as childhood waned and the hormone-fueled sun of puberty rose in the east, I found other pursuits more worthy of exploration. And so, through sun and snow, the mausoleum stood proudly, untouched. But then my father died. Cirrhosis of the liver, a disease I, having begun drinking young and hard, was surely on my own path to. My mother was beside herself. Abaddon women are not what you'd call self-sufficient. She cleaned the same things every day, for hours at a time, whether they needed it or not. She did what she knew how to do. And she detested drink. Any liquor spotted in the house would instantly be dumped and earn its owner a vicious slap upside the head. This was a problem, because I found myself needing a drink more than ever those days. I was the new man of the house, after all, the new Abaddon patriarch. This, truth be told, is what brought me back within those musty mausoleum walls. I needed a place to stash my scotch, and Mother could never go inside. Still, better safe than sorry. I searched high and low for the best place to hide my bottles, perhaps behind the stone eagle perched atop the tomb of great-great-uncle Josiah. No, wait, what's this? A loose brick in the floor. Another, a whole section of floor practically falling apart. It hadn't been like this before, had it? And beneath the brick, which I uprooted in a curious frenzy late one night in my 17th year, beneath the brick I found a trapdoor. A spiral staircase, no railing, Steps made of old, rotten wood. The first one creaked pathetically. If I fell through, if I hurt myself, couldn't get back up, nobody would ever look for me in here. And yet, down I went. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered. How long had it been since these batteries had been changed? I knew I'd never done it. Stupid. I continued on. When I reached the bottom, only a couple dozen steps later, though I took each one with great care, my light extinguished completely. I smacked it against my palm, which for some reason always feels like it should work, but never does. Nothing, just perfect. And what was that? A voice, whispering, barely there. My name. A chill ran through me, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. In fact, it was downright warm in the chamber. Muggy. It did not feel like a room of death. It felt like a greenhouse, a room of eternal life. In response to the voice, I wanted to say, "Who's there?" My tone was intended to be commanding, intimidating. What I said instead, and far more meekly than I'd hoped, was, "I'm here." And a fire sprang to life from a torch on the wall. I stepped backward in alarm and tripped over my own feet. My hands collided painfully with the gravelly stone floor. The room, now illuminated to me, was smaller than I'd expected, far smaller than the mausoleum above. The spiral staircase, a single torch on the wall, and a tomb, a sarcophagus, carved lovingly with intricate detail. Rising to my feet, wiping my dirty, bleeding hands on my jeans, I stepped closer. What were these carvings? Children running, fear etched on their stone faces, a woman slitting a man's throat, a man devouring an infant. The horrors ringed the entire sarcophagus, all with the artistry of a Renaissance fresco. I ran my fingers across the carvings, blood smeared against them. My hands were hurt worse than I'd realized, and the soft voice again, saying my name, coming from inside the tomb. A man's voice, deep and abiding. I looked at the name etched on the stone. Adam Abaddon, born 1642, the first of us. In truth, I regret all that business with Helene. She was a nice girl, well-read, sweet, and funny besides, and a demon in bed. If you must know, in another life, things might have worked out between us. We spent practically all our time together, those weeks after the cafe. I'm normally a guy who needs my space, but I had a job to do. I had to move quickly. I chose my moment with care. It was a Saturday afternoon. One bedroom window in my apartment hung open, a curtain fluttering in the sunlit breeze. We lay there, Helene and I, naked in the sheets, her arm draped over my chest, just catching our breath. "So, when are you going to take me to meet your friends?" I asked. "My friends?" Her cute accent almost drowned in the ambient noise wafting in from outside. "Sure," I said. "In the catacombs?" She paused for a moment. "Oh, wait, you've never been down there before?" "I thought you had." "Nope, but I'm dying to go." "Really?" Helene asked, propping up on her elbow and appraising me. "Well, now I'm dying to show you." I pulled her elbow out from under her playfully, then flipped myself back on top of her. Almost time for round two, but first, not while it's open. Though, I can't stand tourists. I kissed down her lobe, her throat, her collarbone. "I want you to sneak me in," I said conspiratorially. She giggled and squirmed in my arms. "You're bad." Afterward, she said that maybe we shouldn't sneak in. Why didn't I just pop by during her next shift? And she could give me a private tour. She could get in trouble. After all, maybe fired. I told her that they weren't going to fire a model employee like her just for sneaking her boyfriend in, and that if they did, I'd just have to steal her away to my family home in West Virginia, where I'd take care of her every need, and she could take care of the 13 sturdy children she'd bear me. She was mostly interested in my use of the word boyfriend. Apparently that's when it became official. I discovered this by her squeal of excitement. I thought it had already been official. Culture barrier, maybe. Anyway, her objections died there. 3 nights later, past midnight, She and I stole away from the Montparnasse pavilion and across an empty street. There she used her key card to gain our entrance. We passed the booth where they gave out headphones for audio tours. Past the security gates. "Do you want to check my pockets?" I asked her as we walked underneath the detectors. "You can reach in as deep as you like." "Don't be gross," she said, but with a laugh. She was enjoying herself. I got the feeling she had never been the adventurous sort, and she seemed to be getting a genuine thrill from sneaking me around. I'm glad she was happy in those final moments. Before long, we reached a staircase, spiral concrete steps, railings painted white, leading down into the abyss. I peered into the darkness. "Lead the way," I said, fingers tracing the vial in my pocket. In his writings, Adam Abaddon imagined hell as black, no lakes of fire, rivers of sulfur, no devil distributing torments to the masses, just oblivion, non-existence, nothingness. As far as I know, I was the first to find these writings, 4 books, bound in rotted leather, buried with him. I ventured back into the mausoleum night after night to drink Johnny Walker and read the great man's words. And every once in a while, I'd peer into his stone tomb, at the bones that once scaffolded his meat and skin through life. I'd gaze into those holes that used to be eyes and find myself entranced at the darkness, no, the blackness and within. Some nights, I could almost swear he was looking back at me. The books were ostensibly biographical, but Adam was a man of philosophy, of thought. His writings rivaled any of the greats. Some kids cut their teeth on Nietzsche, or Crime and Punishment, or, God forbid, David Foster Wallace. I had my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, and his words sunk deep. 200 years before Darwin, he surmised that we were mere animalia, descended from the apes. He forced his wife, and then later, his daughter, to wash her hands with a lye-based solvent of his own devising before preparing his food. He anticipated the development of flying machines, long-range communication devices, and a global economy. He also worked out a way to rise from the dead. You see, Adam Abaddon's truest achievements were in the realm of the occult. When such themes first appeared in his writing, I thought it a foolish preoccupation of an otherwise brilliant mind. Newton himself squandered countless hours and brain cells on alchemy and superstition. That was before I came to a page cleverly titled Revival of Spirits. I almost skimmed past it, but then noticed the artwork on the page. This was a potion, or a spell, if you like. It showed the user how to take a nearly empty container of liquor, the nearly was important, and make it full again. I glanced at the bottle of Johnny by my side. Not quite empty, as luck or fate would have it, and it had been a long day. A revival of my spirits was just what the doctor ordered. With a mixture of anticipation and embarrassment, I went off in search of ingredients. Vinegar, the blood of a raccoon or a mink. I found a raccoon first. Opium, special thanks to Mother's doctor for never asking too many questions about her frequent Vicodin refills. And of course, the scotch lingering at the bottom of the bottle, of which at least a full 100 drops were required. It all took some time. Just before sunrise, I poured in the vinegar, the blood of the poor beast still lying broken somewhere in the woods, and the 5 Vicodin I hoped Mother might not miss. I placed my hand over the bottleneck. The recipe was very specific. The flesh of my right hand must fully cover the opening of the container, and shook. I repeated a Latin phrase 3 times. It was then that I very nearly dropped the bottle, for it had become much heavier in my hands. In shock, I peered inside. The bottle was full. I sniffed inside. Smelled like Johnny to me. Tentatively, who knows where that raccoon had been. I took a swig. Yep, Johnny Walker Black, through and through. Good Lord. No, I thought. Good Adam. I've never paid for another drop. Down and down we went, Helene and I. 30 spiraling steps, a 5-story building beneath the earth, in the dead of night, all to grant Adam's final plea, or carry my bones nearer hell. Once more I fingered the vial in my pocket. The crushed, powdered bones of Adam Abaddon. That part had been easy. 400-year-old skeletons are not made of stern stuff. Getting it through airport security had been more stressful. I was fully prepared to say the vial was full of drugs. Happily, they didn't catch it, though they did spend a great deal of time frisking an elderly Mexican woman while I sailed through unmolested. When we reached the bottom, Helene led us through a pitch-black stone tunnel with the flashlight on her phone. I crouched as I walked. The ceiling was very near my head. I could reach out my arms and touch both sides at once. The ground was painfully uneven. The walk went on for some time. Not your mother's tourist attraction, to be sure. Finally, we reached an open chamber. Signs abounded, in English and in French, explaining the history of the catacombs, how more than 6 million people came to a final resting place in these subterranean corridors, and begging visitors, please do not touch the remains. If you're curious, the good people of Paris began to realize their burial habits constituted a public health crisis right around the time old. Rotted caskets started crashing through the cellar walls of homes built near centuries-old cemeteries. But, as fate would have it, they'd built all those homes by mining tunnels through the rock deep under the city. So, in the dead of night, after night, after night, city and church officials emptied the graveyards of Paris, stacking the rescued bones against the tunnel walls, floor to ceiling, miles and miles. 6 million souls, a mass grave, just what Adam had ordered. Helene showed me around the tunnels with public access. Bones intermingled along the walls. A stack of tibias might be cut through by a row of skulls. Someone's leg and head might be a long way apart. The thought of it made me strangely sad. Unity. That was Adam's guiding philosophy. Unity of the family, of the nation, of the mind. Death was an affront to Adam because the unity of body and soul was torn asunder. And that's where I came in. After a while, as our conversation about the place started to ebb, I grabbed Helene's water bottle. I'd filled it just before we descended. You know what would make this more fun? I asked, pulling out the vial of pale powder. You've got to be kidding, she said, watching me dump the stuff inside. I screwed the lid back on and shook the bottle with a grin on my face. What's the matter? I asked teasingly. Never gotten high in a room full of dead people before. I pressed the bottle to my lips and pretended to drink. It had to hit her before it hit me. That was crucial. I handed her the bottle. You're serious? She asked. I nodded. It won't last long, I assured her. Come on, it'll be fun. She shrugged, then chugged, more than I thought she'd drink. That was good.
Ah!
She said, wiping her mouth. That tastes horrible. You'll forget all about the taste soon, I said. Let's sit down and wait for it. We found a wall of femurs, the sturdiest bones, to rest upon. I ran my fingers over the damp stone floor. Give me a bit more, I said, reaching for the bottle. You drank more than I did, and this time, I did drink, an act of faith to rival any taken by Moses or Peter. Helene and I laced our fingers together and waited. After a while, she spoke. I feel weird. You're supposed to, I said, looking over at her. She coughed. Blood began to trickle from her nose. What's happening? She managed, coughing more fiercely and spraying more blood from both her mouth and nose. She clutched her stomach, fingers clawing as if trying to dig something out. Then she started to crawl on her hands and knees. Blood dripping. She vomited fiercely. It'll be over soon, I muttered. Then I began to mutter other words, secret words, from the Book of Adam, and before long I felt the pain rise in my own midsection. The blood seep from my own nostrils. Helene was twitching violently on the stone floor, her body contorted, mouth foaming. She was still by the time I began coughing, but it was all happening too fast. I was coughing too hard. I wouldn't have time to finish the spell. Something primal in my body jerked me to my hands and knees. Just as Helene had been, I gasped out the words as I expelled the lining of my stomach through my teeth. Blood splashed the bottom rows of femurs. My brain felt like it was blistering, popping, seeping. How could I have done this to sweet Helene? This was agony beyond imagining. And then it stopped. I don't know if Adam had somehow taken that cup from me, or if the pain receptors in my brain had simply given out. All I know is that I had just enough strength to say the final words before I died. All noise and movement ceased, and the tunnels were peaceful once more. Our bodies lay in crumpled heaps beside one another. The authorities would examine our stomachs, our vomit, and they would find a mixture of cyanide and ancient bones, a lover's pact. Surely, it would be hushed up, cleaned up, reopened quickly and efficiently. The public could not be told how the sacredness of this place had been violated. And then the bones on the wall started to shake, almost imperceptibly, but resolutely, as some ancient power rose up from the depths, from the hell I'd carried Adam's bones nearer. There was a low rumble, and from underneath a wall of bones, Adam Abaddon's body rose anew. "Thou hast done well," said a voice inside our head as we crawled out from the weight of the bones and stood, dusty femurs clattering at our naked feet. "Thank you, Adam," I thought in reply. We stretched our limbs, he for the first time in centuries. Silently, we removed the clothes from my old body, lying still in a gory puddle of its own sick. Silently we put them on, each motion a sacred act. Adam had been, and now, is once again, exactly my size. We looked down at the bodies for a time, at Helene, whose wide, still eyes stared emptily at a pile of bones, both of us grateful for what her sacrifice had made possible. I hadn't known what to expect, but to share a mind was easy. Natural. Even. I reeled through the centuries, memories I'd never lived. A miracle. Finally, Adam lifted our eyes and turned our head toward the exit. "Let us depart," he said, and together we began the climb upward into the starry Paris night. Story 8. My daughter has been doom-scrolling for 14 hours. I had heard a knock on the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I looked around. Nothing. Then I looked down and saw it. Lying there on the doorstep was an old cell phone with a cracked screen. I picked it up and clicked the home button. It opened without a passcode, revealing a home screen with only one app. "Rebecca?" I called out to my 18-year-old daughter as I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me. "You know anything about the cell phone I just found on the doorstep?" "On the doorstep?" She called back from the living room, likely scrolling away on her own phone. "Yeah, with a big crack in it." "Nope. I guess I'll just throw it out then." "Wait, I want to see!" she cried out. Her curiosity piqued as she made her way over to the kitchen. I held it up for her to see. "You looks old, like from when you and Mom were growing up. When your mom and I were growing up, there were no cell phones. Becca." "Sounds boring." Yeah, it was perfectly boring, in the best way possible. Now look at what's become of the world. Yeah, let me see it," she said, snatching the old cracked cell phone out my hand. "What's the passcode?" "There isn't one." She opened it. "Just one app? This phone is so mid." "Mid?" I asked, unfamiliar with her Gen Z slang. "It means like mediocre. Dad, where'd you find this thing? Anyway?" "I told you, on the doorstep. Someone knocked and ran away." "So it's some sort of prank?" "If it is, it's a pretty mid prank," I replied, giving her the same smug look I always did when I landed a dad joke. Your jokes are not funny, Dad. Anyways, I'm gonna see what's in the app," Rebecca said, as she scurried off back to the living room and proceeded to scroll away on the cracked old phone. "Cool. Let me know what you find, Becca," I said casually, as I sat back down at the dinner table and continued reading my newspaper. An hour or so later, My wife Erica returned home from work, and we had dinner. "Rebecca, it's dinner time," Erica called out from the kitchen, but my daughter didn't reply. "Becca," I added, but again, Rebecca ignored us. My wife and I both looked at each other and rolled our eyes. "Your loss. Food'll be cold again," Erica said, referring to the countless other times our social media-obsessed teen had forgone dinner so long that the meal had become cold. "Kids," I muttered under my breath. "So how was work, honey?" A few hours later, my wife and I decided to go upstairs for the night, and seeing that Rebecca was still scrolling away on the couch, reminded her that her dinner was on the table. Once again, our daughter just ignored us as she continued to scroll away on her phone, something that, after raising an 18-year-old daughter, I was very used to. But this time, something was different. This time, she was scrolling on a different phone, the old cracked phone I had found on the doorstep, to be precise. She's still using that old thing. Wonder what app was on there. Must be some game or social media thing, I thought to myself. "Just remember to turn the lights out before you go to bed, Becca," my wife called down, before we retired to our bedroom, to no reply. But the next morning, not only did we find the lights on, but we also found Rebecca still sitting there, sure enough, scrolling away on the old cracked phone. "Rebecca," my wife called out, "did you even sleep last night?" "Yeah, Becca, you really shouldn't be pulling all-nighters like that," I added, as I went to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. But before I could make it that far, something caught my eye on the kitchen table. To my disbelief, there was Rebecca's dinner, still sitting there, completely untouched. That's when I knew that something was very wrong. By the time my wife and I were able to pry the old cracked cell phone out of our daughter's hands, Rebecca had gone into a sudden fit of rage. "Give it back," she screamed, her eyes cold and lifeless. I tossed the phone to Erica behind me, while I stood between her and our daughter. I said,
"Give it back!"
Rebecca screamed again, in a threatening fashion. "Becca, what's gotten into you? It's just an old phone, and a cracked one at that," I began. But before I could continue, my innocent daughter, who had never laid a finger on a soul her entire life, suddenly lunged at me, swung her arm, and ran her nails across my face, tearing the flesh from my skin and causing blood to pour down my neck. "Rebecca!" I yelled, raising my voice. But it was too late. She had already hopped over me and chased my wife into the kitchen. When I finally caught up to her at the entrance to the kitchen, I saw my daughter standing there with a steak knife on one side of the kitchen table, while my wife stood on the other, shaking in fear as she held the old cracked phone in her hand. "What was on that app?" I asked hypothetically out loud, realizing that whatever my daughter had discovered on the phone must have been the cause of her 14-hour doom scroll and subsequent fit of rage. But Erica must have taken me literally, immediately opening the phone and going to the app. I saw a perplexed look wash over my wife's face as she took her finger, placed it on the phone's cracked surface, and started to scroll. "No, Erica, stop," I cried out as I ran over to her and ripped the phone from her hand. But before I could even process what had happened, I heard the steak knife that my daughter was holding fall to the kitchen floor before she too collapsed to the ground. "Becca?" I asked, confused by her sudden change of disposition, but at the same time, relieved that her fit of rage had ceased. That's when I heard a growl behind me, as my daughter's rage had somehow shifted to my wife, and Erica picked up the knife from the floor. "Give it
"Back!"
my wife screamed, her eyes now cold and lifeless. I looked down at my daughter, who looked as if she had just awoken from a trance. That's when I realized that whatever curse had been bestowed upon the old cracked phone's app seemed to only affect the last person who used it. I took my dazed daughter by the hand, and led her out of the kitchen, out of the house, and to the driveway, as my wife followed, still wielding the knife.
Get in!
I insisted, as I opened my car door, and Rebecca hopped inside before I used my key fob to lock her inside. "Give me the phone," my wife cried from behind me as she swung the knife at me. I stepped aside and watched its blade pierce the hood of my car. I thought to call out my wife's name in an attempt to snap her out of it, but immediately realizing that there was only one way to snap her out of her trance. As she struggled to pull the blade out of the car, I seized the opportunity to run back in the house and turn on the sink in the first-floor bathroom. Eventually, my wife came back inside looking for me and, sure enough, headed for the source of the running water. And when she stepped inside, I hopped out from behind the kitchen island, slamming the door behind her, before dragging a nearby bookshelf against the door and reinforcing it with a few other heavy objects. "Give me the phone," I heard her cry out from inside the bathroom, as I looked at the old, cracked cell phone that I was still gripping in my hand, and knew what I had to do. 30 minutes later, the deed was done. The old, cracked cell phone, left on a random neighbor's doorstep in the next town over, where I hoped no one would recognize me. When I got back to the car, my daughter was just sitting there in the passenger seat, still traumatized and speechless from what she had just gone through. We drove home in silence, and when we finally got back, we waited by the barricaded bathroom door as my wife continued to scream, and waited, until eventually she stopped. I slid the heavy objects and bookshelf aside and opened the bathroom door to find Erica just standing there, as if waking from a bad dream, the same exhausted expression on her face that I'd seen previously on my daughter. It had worked. My wife was no longer possessed by the vile device. Erica walked over and hugged me. I looked over at my daughter. She smiled. I smiled back. In that moment, two things became clear. One, someone else had been possessed by the phone prior to leaving it on my doorstep. Two, someone new was possessed by it now. But all that mattered to me in that moment was that my family was okay. I wish I could say that after the dust settled. My daughter swore off cell phones, social media, and apps altogether. But the truth is, it only took a day before she was back to doom scrolling on her own phone. Now every time she does, and her dinner gets cold, I can't help but fear that she's been possessed again. But then I realize she's just a teenager. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.